see you. Really wonderful program today. One of the great perks of my job as president of MEI, my name's Stuart Jones, I'm the president of MEI. One of the perks of this job is that I get to travel around with Charles Lister to places like Damascus and Doha. And it's been an extraordinary several weeks because we were in Damascus earlier in December and then just came back from a really intense Doha forum where, of course, Syria, no surprise, was at the center of the discussion. So we're doing a lot of Syria programming today and this week. In addition to this conference, as some of you know, we'll be rolling out the trip report from our recent trip to Syria on a call this afternoon that has more than 800 people signed up to listen. And that, of course, is a function of the outstanding leadership and reputation of General Joe Votel, who led our trip, former Central Command commander, former commander of SOCOM, as you know. So today, this morning, though, we're focused on this conference and talking about the issues facing. We have a wonderful panel for you today. Two great friends. In addition to Charles, we have Robert Ford, who is, of course, associated with Syria in everyone's minds, and Ambassador Barbara Leaf, who will be phoning in from Abu Dhabi. And as we all know, Barbara was one of the first people into Damascus following the fall of the Bashar regime. So in addition to that, I'm really delighted that we're going to start the conference with a video from Admiral Bradley Cooper, who is a Central Command commander, who's been deeply engaged in Syria, who's played hoops with President al-Shara. And so I'm going to turn to that in a second. But I just want to share with some of you who may not be able to join the call this afternoon some of the takeaways from our Syria trip. And I'll do it really briefly, and then I'll turn it over to the video. But we had a delegation that was led by General Votel, and Charles was on the delegation. I was on the delegation. We had some members of our Board of Governors and some of our other supporters. It's a very diverse group of people involved in finance and energy and security and tech. And we met with a series of a bunch of senior leaders within Damascus. Some of them were HTS, some of them were HTS, and some are not HTS who had come in, ministers who were very successful in the private sector in Dubai and other places and have now come back to serve in important roles like president of the central bank and head of the telecommunications agency. And again, I think, we came up with 4 recommendations out of this trip that I wanted to share with you. One thing is we believe that it's imperative that the U.S. government establish a diplomatic presence in Damascus. Everybody else is there. We've got, the EU is there, the Turks are there, the Jordanians are there, the Qataris are there, the Saudis are there. The Saudis have taken over the first floor of the Four Seasons. Now, look, I think that I honestly believe that Ambassador Tom Barak has done an extraordinary job of diplomacy to bring us to the point that we are at in Syria. It's sort of incredible that the U.S. government in a very short amount of time was able to take the decision to lift the sanctions. And now we're on the verge of that, possibly even this week, with the passage of the NDAA in the House. So this is not a critique in any way of Ambassador Barak, but rather to recognize that once you get some of these key policy measures in place, you really need to have some retail diplomacy and engagement. And it can't be military engagement. It can't all be soft. It needs to really be with engaging with all these new ministers and ministries that have now been created that are trying to create development. Recommendation number 1 is open U.S. diplomatic presence in some form or another. 2 is we really need to get the U.S. tech community involved in what's going on in Syria. You've got a very entrepreneurial nation and population. You've got a minister of technology who has been extremely successful in the private sector and has a vision for making Syria a central part of the tech revolution that's going on in the Gulf, and connecting to that with a scheme for routing internet fiber through Syria, avoiding the Red Sea, which of course is now in peril because of the Houthis, and actually cutting down transmission time. So there's a huge, I mean, people aren't thinking in these terms, but there's a huge tech opportunity and angle to reconstruction in Syria, we believe. Three, we really need, as the United States, to clarify the U.S. government relationship with the SDF. There's a lot of ambiguity. There's a lot of, I think, uncertainty on the Syrian side, what the United States is going to do about this. I was in Baghdad when the U.S. relationship with the SDF was established. It made perfect sense to me at the time because the wolf at the sled was ISIS, and we had to defeat ISIS, and the SDF was the best possible tool for that purpose. So this is not an anti-SDF sermon, but now those forces need to be integrated to respect Syrian sovereignty. Those forces now have to be integrated into the Syrian security apparatus, and the United States has to be very clear about that. So I would remove any uncertainty about the U.S. position on that. It's difficult when U.S. forces have fought in the same trenches with the SDF. We understand that that's a special bond, but we now have to clarify our policy. And finally, I would say, as Charles took us out to one of the suburbs of Damascus, and we saw the extraordinary destruction that was wreaked by the Bashar regime, the incredible human suffering that he imposed. And of course, one of the remnants of that is the unexploded ordnance. It's landmines, it's remnants of missiles, et cetera. And we know from our experience in Iraq that there can be no real reconstruction without addressing the UXO problem. I mean, this is urgent. Again, one of the things that impressed me in our meetings with the Syrian leadership was that they said, hey, look, we get it. There's not going to be a pledging conference for Syria. There's not going to be billions of dollars in reconstruction money for Syria. That's not how this is going to work for us. We understand that. We are prepared to rebuild our country, on a private sector basis. And we think because of the creativity and the entrepreneurialism of the Syrian diaspora, we can do those things. But one of the things that the international community has to be involved in is the removal of unexploded ordnance. We know we can do this. This is going to be a huge job in Syria because probably it's the place where there's now more unexploded ordnance than any place else in the world. But we've seen that we can do this in places like Iraq. And again, it's not that the United States has to fund it, but the United States on this issue has been a very successful convener, and we believe that this is an important issue on which the United States can convene. So sorry, I just wanted to get in my small sermon before I defer to the genuine experts. And now I'm really pleased to present this video from Admiral Bradley Cooper, Central Command Commander. Thank you. Issue on which the United States can convene. So sorry, I just wanted to get in my small sermon before I defer to the genuine experts. And now I'm really pleased to present this video from Admiral Bradley Cooper, Central Command Commander. Thank you. Issue on which the United States can convene. So sorry, I just wanted to get in my small sermon before I...
Spend it a second time.
Hi, I'm Admiral Brad Cooper, the commander of U.S. Central Command. It's an honor to address conference attendees on the historic opportunity presented by Syria's ongoing transition. The Middle East Institute remains an important forum for thoughtful analysis of a region undergoing profound change. I want to thank MEI and especially Charles Lister for hosting this important conference and inviting me to provide an operational perspective 1 year since the beginning of Syria's transition. Unfortunately, I could not make it in person, but I appreciate the opportunity to provide this recorded message. The United States and Syria have a shared interest in preserving peace and stability across the Middle East. Since assuming command of CENTCOM in August, I've been privileged to visit Syria multiple times, including a historic trip to Damascus in September, where I initially met President al-Shara and became CENTCOM's first commander to visit what is clearly a vibrant city brimming with hope, possibility, and opportunity. Every engagement with President al-Shara and other Syrian leaders has been focused on partnering in new and different ways. And to that end, CENTCOM's lines of effort in Syria are threefold. First, we're sustaining our aggressive pursuit of ISIS in Syria. Second, we're supporting the integration of Syrian democratic forces with the Syrian government. And third, we'll coordinate and foster collaboration with Syrian forces. For our first line of effort in aggressively pursuing ISIS, relentless military pressure continues. U.S. forces, coalition teammates, and Syrian partners have been working together to eliminate remnants that remain in Syria. Just to give an example, in the month of October, U.S. forces advised, assisted, and enabled Syrian partners during more than 20 operations against ISIS, diminishing the terror attacks and export violence around the world. We're also degrading their ability to regenerate. I believe that it's also important to address the displacement camps in northeast Syria. Right before I met President al-Shara for the first time in Damascus, I was able to visit al-Hol in person. This was actually my fourth trip to the camp, which reinforced my view of the need to accelerate repatriations. The impact on displaced persons devastated by years of war and repression has been immense. As I mentioned in a late September speech at the UN, continuing to repatriate displaced persons and detainees in Syria is both a humanitarian imperative and a strategic necessity. There has been progress for sure. We have gone from more than 70,000 people to now 26,000 people at al-Hol and al-Roj in the past 2 years, thanks to the efforts of so many to repatriate their citizens, and we're working with international partners to supercharge this effort. Repatriating vulnerable populations before they're radicalized is a decisive blow against ISIS regenerating. I'm encouraged by efforts of the international community to continue repatriations in 2026. Rooting out ISIS once and for all brings stability to the Syrian people, as will SDF's successful integration with forces led by the Syrian government, which is our second line of effort. SDF's successful integration with the Syrian government forces will lead to a more predictable and stable security environment. On March 10th, both sides agreed to the concept of integration. As discussions on integration continue between the Syrian government and the SDF, we stand ready to support and have been doing so in meaningful ways, including just last week in Damascus. I know that all parties view these conversations as important. Both sides are committed and we will stay engaged. Even today, as I film this, meaningful discussions are underway with the SDF on integration in the future. Equally important are CENTCOM's efforts to foster U.S. military collaboration with Syrian forces. This is our third line of effort. Cooperation with our Syrian partners is imperative to our collective success. Last month, as many of you know, the Syrian government joined the Global Coalition Against ISIS as its 90th member. The Global Coalition focuses on stabilizing and redeveloping areas formerly controlled by ISIS since their territorial defeat in 2019. And just the other week, we worked with the Syrian Ministry of Interior in locating and destroying 15 ISIS weapon sites in southern Syria. This operation eliminated over 130 mortars and rockets, multiple small arms, anti-tank mines, IED material, and illicit drugs. We have now had multiple instances of collaboration with the Syrian government to counter very specific ISIS threats. And as you may have seen this past week, I publicly praised Syria for the role their security forces played in interdicting weapons intended for Hezbollah. So these are the types of tangible security gains we can make on the ground through close cooperation with Syrian government forces. Eliminating the ISIS threat in Syria requires international participation, which is why our new partnership with the Syrian government offers new opportunities. I appreciate our Syrian partners focusing on this effort. I'm also grateful to U.S. Special Envoy to Syria, Ambassador Tom Barrack, for his leadership. CENTCOM will continue to play a very active role in supporting Ambassador Barrack's efforts to realize the President's vision of a prosperous Middle East and a stable Syria at peace with itself and its neighbors. We are highly involved in enabling the U.S. interagency to engage with the Syrian government in Damascus, supporting more than a dozen visits from the U.S. interagency and Congress just since last summer. And because I know it's on your mind, yes, we were also able to fit in a few three-pointers during basketball. That's well documented. So we at CENTCOM are all in on hoops diplomacy. It's a new form, but it's effective, I can assure you. So today, 1 year since Syria's transition began, We remain committed to the work ahead, laser focused on protecting our forces, defending the homeland, and ensuring that the defeat of terror endures. We will continue to work with our Syrian partners to pursue ISIS, support SDF's integration, and foster cooperation. We'll also remain vigilant despite the huge success we've seen in halting the brutal ISIS caliphate, and we will ensure that gains made under the leadership of my predecessor, General Eric Kurilla, are lasting. While much work remains, I believe there's great reason for optimism and hope about the historic opportunity ahead. A Syria at peace with itself and its neighbors can lead to a more peaceful and prosperous Middle East. And so again, thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm grateful. I hope you have a great conference. Here's wishing you all the very best. Happy holidays, and let's stay in touch. Thanks so much.
So, MEI is so grateful for our special relationship with Central Command. So grateful to Admiral Cooper for giving us that video. As he said, he at one point had hoped to join us live today because his schedule didn't allow it. He sent that really informative and I thought useful video. So now it's time to start the panel. And I'd like to invite the panelists up to the stage. I've already given some introduction, so I'll be brief. But again, I just want to say how honored and proud I am to have Robert Ford here today with us. As many of you know, Robert probably associated with the Syria issue and with Syrian freedom more than any U.S. diplomat or U.S. official. So it's a great honor to welcome Robert back to MEI. Also, a really great honor to welcome back Barbara Lee, former Assistant Secretary under the Biden administration, former U.S. Ambassador, and with the distinction of really leading U.S. diplomacy in the first weeks after the fall of the collapse, after the fall of the Bashar regime. So welcome, Barbara. Good to see you from Abu Dhabi. And of course, we have Charles Lister, who needs no introduction at MEI, the premier scholar on Syria here in Washington, D.C. It's, as I said earlier, going to the Doha Forum with Charles is like, being part of, the entourage of a movie star. People are just coming up to him and want to take selfies and want to get the latest from Charles. And you'll have the benefit of the moderation of Ken Pollack, who of course is Vice President for Policy here at MEI, and a great moderator, and also someone who will bring great insight and utility to this conference. So thank you all for being here this morning again. And Ken, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stu. Welcome, everyone. Ahlan wa sahlan. It's wonderful to see you all here. If you need more introduction, there is this new thing called the internet. You can find out all you'd like about these two gentlemen and this wonderful woman on the internet. They are all extremely distinguished personnel. What we're going to do this morning is I'm going to start out by asking the panel several questions to get us started. I want to cover the waterfront. There's obviously a lot to talk about with regard to what's going on in Syria, the U.S.-Syria relationship, its past, its present, and its future. And then hopefully around 45 minutes or so, about halfway into the panel, I'll open things up to questions from the audience, and we'll also try to, technology willing, integrate some questions from folks online as well. All right, so the question that I'd like to start by asking all three of the panelists is a fairly simple one, which is you've all been in Syria over the course of the last year, and we are 367 days into the new Syria. Give us your sense. How should we all be thinking about Syria? You're all experts on it. Again, you've been there several times. You've seen lots of different facets of it. For those of us who don't have the breadth of your wisdom, your experience with Syria, how should we be thinking about what's going on in Syria? Barbara, I'd like to start with you. And by the way, thank you very much for joining us from the fabled undisclosed location. It's wonderful to have you. So Barbara, since you're out in the region, and that's all I'll say about where you are, why don't you start us off? Give us your sense of how we should be thinking about Syria, what you're seeing going on there right now as kind of the basis of the relationship moving forward.
Okay, well, big question, and thank you for having me on this, Ken. I'm delighted to be there with Robert and Charles, virtually at least. So look, I go back to the conversation I had with Ahmed Ashara almost a year ago, December 20th. And a lot of what he said at that time in that conversation, he held to over the course of this past week. So, the theme he kept striking, he didn't put it this way, but I was thinking of a certain Turkish foreign minister who in 2011 said, Turkey's new approach to the Middle East was no problems with neighbors. And of course, Turkey's had problems with its neighbors ever since. But he's really held to it. He's done an extraordinarily effective job, both personally and through the travel of his foreign minister, to really work that integration piece of Syria back into breaking out of the isolation it's been in, and the terrible relations it's had with neighbors and the larger region, and doing the personal diplomacy, but also demonstrating that he's good for what he says along the way. And I know that has substantially mitigated the spectrum of feelings that regional leaders felt, ranging from anxiety to horror at his march into Damascus a year ago. So that, A plus on the foreign policy front. I track very closely, especially through Charles's reporting, the statistics on violence, and all things considered, terrible violence in March on the coast, and then July in Sweda. But considering the prospect that confronted Syria a year ago of real stark intercommunal violence and just reprisal killings for the 14 years of the war, 50 years of the Assad's demolition of the society, I would have expected and feared much more intercommunal violence and just general sort of revenge killings and so forth. So, that's very encouraging, and more or less so far so good on allowing basic freedoms. I think we'll come back to that as maybe places where he needs to do a better job. But those are my essential judgments.
Terrific. That's a great start for us, Barbara. Robert, why don't you pick up from where Barbara left off? What's your sense? What should we know about Syria?
Well, first, Ken, thank you for the invitation, and it's nice to be back in Washington. And I want to highlight two people in the back corner who were on the team at the State Department during the early years of the revolution and worked extraordinarily hard to boost respect for human rights and decency in Syria. Wael and Lisa, so nice to see you here. I thought when Ahmed Shara took Damascus that it might end okay, and it might end up like Libya. There were a lot of armed groups running around in Syria, some directly under Ahmed Shara, some loosely under Ahmed Shara, and some not under Ahmed Shara whatsoever. And it seemed like it could tilt in a very bad direction, and it hasn't. That is not to say that Syria is out of the woods. I don't think it is by any stretch of the imagination. But as Barbara just said, so far, so good. I rush to emphasize here that taking a country, and we saw this in Iraq in spades, taking a country that has very little history of political culture outside of an authoritarian context, taking a country which has genuine sociological conflicts and a history of conflicts. I don't want to overemphasize that, but they are real. It's not going to change in a year, and it's not going to change in 10 years. So it's a gradual process marked by incremental steps, some of which are visible and some are which are not visible. So two key things I would note to you. First, the Syrian forces under Ahmed Shara have not split away from Damascus. It's tenuous, obviously, but I am very struck, and you should be too, that the Syrian government last 2 weeks ago started public trials of 16 security force members accused of human rights violations in Syria on the coast against Alawi civilians, and they held the judicial proceedings on live public TV in Syria. Name to me another country that has done such a thing. So I'm not saying that accountability is solved. It obviously is not. And it won't be in 6 months or a year or 5 years, but it's starting. There's a tangible step. And you'll notice that the reaction inside the Syrian security forces themselves has been managed. If there were elements that said this is too far, we can't accept this, they're under control, at least so far. So second thing I would say, and I think this is a really critical issue for the country, is the future relationship between Damascus and the autonomous administration in eastern Syria, which has grown up under American government tutelage. Two things. First, there is a difference between having an interim agreement and having a long-term constitutional solution. And I think even Damascus says that there isn't going to be a constitutional discussion to solve Syria for some years. So if there is a way to reach an interim agreement, I think that's a positive step. Second thing I would say is, in the meantime, the more people-to-people contacts can be increased, whether that's through business, family visits, education, whatever it is, I think that's a positive step in helping to reunite communities in eastern Syria and western Syria, which have been largely isolated from each other for a decade. So there are things that are happening that are good. There's more that could happen that would be good, but Syria is by no means out of the woods.
Another great foundational piece for us. Okay, Charles, what do we add to that?
Totally would echo everything that Barbara and Robert have said. In fact, many of the things they said were already on my mind. So I'll try and say other things. I'll try to add to it. The first one, very simple, which is, within a matter of a handful of weeks of Bashar's fall, I was in Syria, all across the country, and was struck by the extent that early on, everyone was freely talking about politics. They were criticizing, the immediate sort of caretaker government, as they were calling themselves at the time. They were criticizing their neighboring, village. The sudden kind of openness of politics, which had completely not existed before in Syria, was a sort of dramatic kind of awakening. And the encouraging sign is that hasn't changed. If anything, it's built with time. I mean, the last time I was in Damascus, there was a whole 3-day conference, which spent most of its time constructively critiquing the current government and all of its work on things like the constitution. I mean, this is a brand new experience for Syria, but over 12 months, the fact that not only has it not ended, it hasn't been curtailed, it hasn't been controlled, but it's increased and expanded is really encouraging. On top of that, I think it's really important to say, and certainly I've been saying it since almost day one, is that we all need, and this echoes, I think, a lot of what Robert was saying in particular, which is we need to temper our expectations about what we expect from the outside, from Syria, not the government, but from Syria as a country, as a community, as a nation, and as a state. You can't come out of 53 years of the Assad dictatorship and the way that it controlled with an iron grip every aspect of society, whilst filling it with corruption, and the patriarchy and everything else, with a smooth, perfect transition in the first 12 months. And that's precisely what we have seen. It hasn't been smooth. There have been significant bumps along the road. There have been mistakes made. There has been plenty of violence and significant divisions. But the key thing, as Barbara was saying, is that we keep our eye on the horizon and we try to measure everything, taking all of that into account. And so whether you look at the politics and the openness, if you look at the levels of violence, as Barbara was saying, if you look at a number of other metrics, we have generally moved in the right direction throughout this first 12 months, which was always going to be the hardest 12 months of a transition. So I think that's encouraging too. I think the Syrian transitional government's decision clearly to focus predominantly on foreign policy in certainly the first 6 months, if not the whole 12 months of the past, was a real gamble. It's not that it hasn't focused on domestic issues, but I think it overwhelmingly placed an emphasis on, given who we are, we really do need to acquire the legitimacy and the credibility from the international community. And I think in many ways that has given it the chance to go into year 2 and then start to focus more heavily, I hope, on all of those internal issues around transitional justice and moving things forward. And as Robert said, the fact that we've had a public, the beginnings of a public trial, it's actually set to resume, I think, on Christmas Day, I think is all encouraging early signs. Certainly not to say that there isn't a lot of more work to be done, and there absolutely is. But we have to be patient, we have to be realistic, and I think, thankfully, we have to continue to support in all of the ways that we can and that we are.
That's great. And I would like to come back very much to this question of what can we expect, what is reasonable to expect, but also what are the mistakes and the potential pitfalls out there. But let's start to bring the U.S. into this now. And so the next question that I've got for all three of you, and Robert, perhaps I'll start with you on this one, is let's just look back on the past 367 days. How's the U.S. done, right? How would you grade us? You don't need to give us a grade. But what's the U.S. done well, do you think? What mistakes have we made? But just, as Charles just pointed out, I think that you and Barbara are very much in agreement. This was a critical period of time. How did we handle the transition? You were the last U.S. ambassador to Syria. How have we done in this new era?
I think we've done pretty well, frankly. I think the administration and the president himself made a bold decision, and really a bold decision, to meet with Ahmed Shara in Saudi Arabia. I mean, I don't know about you, but I was at first a little dumbstruck by it. I've met him myself 3 times, but I'm not the president of the United States. Obviously, there was a role of Turkey and Saudi Arabia in that, but still, it was a bold decision. And then he hosted him in the Oval Office, which, when you think about it, is even more remarkable. So the efforts to reestablish a dialogue across a variety of issues, economic issues, political regional stability issues, counterterrorism issues, I think that's all very much to the positive. And if you don't engage Ahmed Shara personally, I don't think it's nearly as successful, because the Syrian government itself is still building institutional capacity. But there's a lot that flows up to the very top as they fill in and recreate government mechanisms and government institutions. So I think all of that is very much to the good. We'll see. Mohammed Al-Ghanem will know better than I do whether the vote today to repeal the Caesar sanctions goes forward. I think that too is very positive. It does not fix the question of reconstruction in Syria. And the United States, I don't think, is actually going to be that key of a player in the reconstruction once the secondary sanctions are lifted. But there may be areas where U.S. investment can be involved. We may not be the lead investor. I don't think we need to be. There are states in the region that are really interested, Europeans. So, but the administration, I think, in the past year has done a good job setting things up for follow-on.
Great. Charles, let me turn to you and what you want to add. And again, I absolutely want to come to the question of what should the U.S. be doing in the future in just a moment. But again, it's a year after the event. I think it's important to memorialize it, both in the sense of recognizing this dramatic change in Syria, but also taking stock of what we do well, what we do poorly, both with regard to Syria, and we may someday get another shot at this someplace else. Good to know what we did badly.
I think the first thing to set out very clearly, and this won't be a surprise to anyone in the room, which is when the U.S. government under the previous president, President Biden, was faced with Ahmed al-Shara assuming the transitional presidency in Syria, this was a very unique and very unprecedented situation to be faced with. Certainly, if someone in the State Department had been told, okay, so imagine we're going to have fall of Bashar al-Assad and we're going to have someone assume the presidency, I don't think anyone would have placed Ahmed al-Shara as the ideal solution in that scenario. So this was a kind of stunning, surprising, and development with huge dilemmas. But what was clearly, I think, a good thing is Ambassador Leaf right here was there in Damascus with a significant delegation from the US government really early on to send a signal that we were open, that we wanted to engage, that we wanted to understand, and that we wanted to give it a chance. And I think that very early signal was crucial. That set the tone. Of course, I think it's an open secret that there had been contact and communication with these guys going back a while. But in terms of a public diplomatic engagement very early on, that was really important. And then as a follow-up to that, I would then pivot, of course, as we went into a transition here in the US. Diplomacy kind of took a back step for a while as the Trump administration came into office. Again, no secret, super skeptical of the new Syrian government. And frankly, I think in January, none of us expected that Donald Trump would be shaking hands with Ahmed al-Shara 4 months later. But in that vacuum, I have to give Admiral Cooper, but particularly his predecessor, General Kurilla, huge credit that behind the scenes, the military almost took on, and they probably wouldn't want me to say it in this way, but they almost took on diplomacy themselves behind the scenes to fill some of that vacuum. And very quickly, to give them also the credit, their instinct was, despite the obvious challenges, this new government has to be engaged. Of course, we had 10 years of a superb partnership with the Syrian Democratic Forces, but they're a non-state actor. They're not a sovereign government. Now we have a sovereign government that we could test, we can engage, and we can see where that goes. And in working through a sovereign government, as Admiral Cooper was, I think, implying, brings with it many, many options that you cannot have when you're working through a non-state actor. And so Major General Leahy from Baghdad, as well as General Kurilla, flying in and out, had an extremely important role to play, not just in beginning to engage in, mediate the dialogue between the SDF and Damascus, but also continuing to send the signals on behalf of the US government that we were there to engage and we were there to test and we wanted to have a relationship, a conditions or expectations-based relationship. And that, I mean, on the security level, has, come on leaps and bounds. And I think there's a lot more that's going on than Admiral Cooper was addressing himself, but sort of stunning and extraordinary leaps and bounds that security relationship has come. And that's because of that very early engagement, which began right at the beginning of the year. And now that we have the Trump administration doing exactly the same, they're now complementing each other, which I think is very, very important. The test will come as the kind of honeymoon phase of the transition not necessarily comes to an end, but eases off as I think we enter 2026. How much that sustained engagement continues. And then, I know we're going to tackle the future, but the key test will be the Syrians expect, maybe unrealistically, but they expect that we in the United States have the key, the solution to resolving the SDF's integration into the state, Swada's reintegration into the state, and Israel backing off from its hostile posture towards Syria. And that's placing great pressure on the US government to somehow find or mediate or pave a path towards resolutions on all three of those key issues.
Great points. All right, Barbara, Charles opened the door, and I'm going to walk through it. So I want to ask you first, obviously, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. But, I think everyone in the room would love to hear a little bit about what it was like in December of last year, when, as Charles points out, you were the Assistant Secretary for the Near East. The Bashar al-Assad regime fell, and all of a sudden you were confronted with this new opportunity. And as Charles said, the Biden administration was the first one to take this incredibly courageous step. So I'd love it if you wanted to give us any kind of a flavor of what that was like and what the decision-making looked like and how you came to the decisions you did.
Well, some of it was just, it was fortuitous that I was already out in the region, that I was in Manama for the IISS dialogue, the fateful weekend. And I was going on to Amman and then to Baghdad to do a series of farewell calls to, good good partner country officials. And John Bass, the Undersecretary for Political, had planned and came out to join me in Amman to go to Baghdad. And we immediately added Turkey to the itinerary. And then the secretary called and said, well, should I come out? And we both said yes. So we met him in Ankara. And it all sort of ran quickly, sort of almost by instinct, diplomatic instinct. It was self-evident that we should collect up, partner countries with a lot of interests in where we would all end up on the question of whether to deal with Ahmadinejad, HTS, etc. And I'll be diplomatic, even though I'm not a diplomat any longer. I was afraid that we would end up our last 6 or 7 weeks in office taking a sort of mincing, cautious approach to whether even to engage, etc. And I was determined that we were going to go hell for leather to make that first engagement, which would be a critical one both in assessing but also in messaging, and do that via a collection of comparing of notes and trying to corral others into a common effort, which we were able to do. And the last thing I said to Secretary Blinken as he got on a plane from the ministerial in Aqaba was, he said, what can I do to help? And I said, well, I'm staying here until you get Washington to say I can go in, because I'm going to go in. So, that was one thing. And then the folks in Washington, NSC State, senior levels came up with what I thought was a pretty self-evident thing we needed to do, which was to tell him we were taking the bounty off his head as just a practical measure. Otherwise I had to arrest him when I met him and bring him into DS. So that was good. Of course, the administration took a very de minimis approach on that first, waiver, which was more, political signaling, but, was reasonable because we were handing off to a new administration. All that said, if I can jump quickly to,
Please.
Sort of the scorecard, I would say the first and most important thing, and it did come a little bit later after this internal wrangling that is frankly normal for a new administration over whether and how to engage, appointing Tom Barrack as an envoy so that there was a driving force of diplomatic engagement was a great move. Even if he's double-hatted, he's been really industrious in pursuing all of this. Obviously, to my mind, all the right moves on sanctions from the administration. I think a pretty good pressure kept up on the regional states to engage and do their part. I will say very weird, uneven public messaging. And, on the one hand, I agree, fine, it's fair enough that with this new government coming out of not just 14 years of brutal civil war, but 50 plus years of the Assad, machine destroying the country. Yeah, you don't want to do the usual, everything's important and everything's a priority and we expect you to do X, Y, and Z. And on the other hand, some of the messaging about, really the only thing that works in this region are benevolent monarchies. I mean, is that including Syria? And I don't think that's fair to Syrians. So I think the messaging's odd, and I also think it also almost comes across too as dismissing the importance of the integration piece. And I know we'll talk about that more, but in terms of the Druze and obviously the SDF, but sort of integration of the provinces, the communities who have all slipped into kind of a soft cantonization. That's a stability issue to my mind. That's not just sort of namby-pamby, human rights demarches. I mean, there's a moral good to it, but there's also a stability factor for that. So I think, and then, all due speed to reopen, but I guess we'll get into that, what they should do in the future. I just think it's been great that Tom Barrack has been in and out, but I think there should be much more of a diplomatic force of engagement, even if there can't be a persistent presence.
That's great. Thanks, Barbara. All right, so let's start to turn to the future. And Charles, I'll start with you on this one. And let me start by asking the big, broad question. What do you think U.S. policy towards Syria should be in the future, and why? What is it that we should be striving for? And again, let's start with just hit the top lines.
I mean, obviously, we need to continue doing what we've already done. But I think in many ways, and assuming we're about to have very good news on the Caesar Act fairly imminently, in many ways, the hard 40,000-foot level work is done. We've secured the relationship. We have achieved trust and, I think, credibility on both sides of that bilateral relationship. We've removed sanctions, and I think it shouldn't go without stating that the removal of sanctions has happened at record-breaking speeds. I mean, there is no comparison that comes anywhere close to what we've seen on Syria. And I think, that's, yes, a lot of that goes down to, I think, President Trump's own kind of gut instinct way to do things. But there is a deeper government bench that has worked on this through Treasury and State and elsewhere. And I think that they all deserve credit for moving so rapidly and so boldly to give Syria a chance, as President Trump says. But now that all of that's done, now the hard work starts. Now we have to help, continue to engage and to support in the ways that we will and we can. And like Ambassador Barak repeatedly says, the age of American nation building is over, so we're not going to see anything like that. But there is still a lot that we can do in terms of bringing in a deeper bench. And I think, as Ambassador Jones said in his introductory remarks, the United States does need to look to establish a permanent diplomatic presence in Damascus. Ambassador Barak, and I've seen this myself firsthand in person several times now, has an excellent relationship with President al-Shara, Foreign Minister Shaybani, and others, and there's no substitute for that. But you do need to have level 2, level 3, level 4 underneath that in Damascus, having that face time, building the rapport, and doing the hard work of building the substantive dynamics of that relationship. It's an open secret as well, I think, now that Ambassador Barak has also spearheaded facilitating a lot of engagement with the US private sector. Major energy companies, electricity companies, construction firms are all in advanced talks with Damascus, in large part because he has facilitated those early meetings and then I think provided the space for them to continue. But there will still, I think, be steps that US diplomacy can take to help to continue to facilitate. I think I've spoken to so many former State Department people in the last few weeks about this, and I think every single one of them has said it's an underappreciated aspect of US diplomacy that we can also be there to support private sector engagement and putting US business in prime position to not just to benefit, but also to help. And I think whether it's Chevron and ConocoPhillips or Honeywell and all these major companies, there's a lot more that we can do on that side too. But ultimately, to close it out, it still comes down to these thorny issues, which I still think are nigh on existential for the transition in Syria, which is the SDF, Sweda, and Israel. I think if those three issues are not resolved in 2026, Syria will be in a much more tricky place than they are currently right now, especially the Israel one, which is heading in very dangerous directions right now, with ministers now saying publicly, we're heading towards war, there's no way we can avoid that. I think we need to knuckle down very, very hard on that issue. I mean, now, but certainly next year.
Very good. And I'd like to actually come back and pick up on those in some grounds, but I'm not going to let you go that easily, Charles. We're a think tank, right? And one of our jobs is to think outside the box and to get people to think about things that they'd rather not because they need to. So, you made the point. You're absolutely right. Tom Barak, this administration has said no more nation building. And, look, we all to some extent have PTSD from the experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the truth of the matter is that both the history of the United States doing nation building and of the world doing nation is far more complicated than that. And truth be told, having gone over the historical stuff recently, we're actually a lot better at it than people give us credit for. We actually have more successes than we do failures. And so recognizing that, yes, politically right now, it may not be possible, it's still important for us. And I want to put it to you to ask the question of, okay, nevertheless, would it be the right thing to do if we could? right? Should we be saying to the Trump administration, we understand your reticence about this, but the truth of the matter is Syria really could use some help, and we actually are in a good position to do it. So I want to put that back to you. Let's imagine for a moment that the administration were willing to consider this. Would it be a useful thing for us to do? Would it be the right thing to do? Or again, is it really the right thing for us to simply encourage private business, deal with the political issues, and otherwise hands off?
Well, listen, I think anyone in any post-conflict country would say the same thing what I'm about to say, which is Syria is complicated. But it is very complicated internally, but also geopolitically. And I think one of the dangers that has been faced in the past when the US government or other governments have decided they want to do nation building is that you end up also treading on a lot of geopolitical toes, which doesn't always help. So it's not always just about the domestic situation inside Iraq or Syria or anywhere else, but the geopolitics around Syria remain delicate. I think the fact that in 12 months we haven't seen divisions emerge within, overt divisions emerge within regional states on Syria is really encouraging, but that doesn't mean it will last forever. The fact that we've seen Damascus manage to achieve, balanced relationships with Russia, China, the United States, and Europe is fantastic. But as I put to the foreign minister a few days ago, that may not necessarily be sustainable forever either. And so if you then place America's attempts to kind of manage the nation building process on top of that, the geopolitics can rapidly get very complicated. So I actually think if you put the question to President al-Shara, he would probably say it's not necessary. It's better for us to work with lots of different partners. When you speak to, as we have here in MEI, the Minister of Economy and Industry, but also in Damascus with the Minister of Finance and the central bank governor, they want that wider spread of partners. They don't want to put all their eggs in one basket or to be perceived to be putting all their eggs in one basket. So they want to benefit from America's greatest, commercial and business entities, but they also want to work with others. And I think given the delicate geopolitics of Syria, that suits Syria far better. But again, that's not to say that, and again, despite my accent, speaking as an American, it's not to say that the United States of America shouldn't seek to be a prime player. It should. I mean, we have a commercial interest in supporting Syria, but also seeing our sort of business interests benefit from that. But it doesn't have to come core from the US government. And that's before we tackle the fact that for the next 3 years, it's unrealistic anyway, given where this administration stands.
Very good. Barbara, let me turn to you and put the same question. You can pick up the nation building piece or not, but I simply wanted to register the point of, I don't think that we should necessarily bind ourselves to what the Trump administration is willing to do. Part of what we should be doing is pushing the administration to perhaps do some things that they don't want to do if we think that they are the right thing. But let me put the general question back to you of what should US policy be towards Syria moving forward?
Well, first of all, I think we should ban the term nation building because it has such a pejorative cast to it. And that's from people who used to do a lot of it, as well as those longstanding critics. But look, what should our policy be? I think our approach generally should be assuming that things don't go drastically off the rails in terms of what I think we'll probably talk about it in a bit, red lines and so forth. We can and should continue to be, a sort of corraler of regional effort and regional and larger effort to do the stabilization piece, to do the pulling and pressing, pulling and cajoling and pushing on a variety of fronts. We should, in my view, quite apart of the structural piece that I think Charles covered quite thoroughly, a platform. We need a platform for our presence. That's the U.S. Embassy. We should not dither around for a year or more or let it fall into the clutches of, people who are looking at only through the security prism. We should do a Friends of Syria group. This, although multilateralism is not sort of the in the DNA of the administration, this does spread out the sort of the responsibilities, the roles, the support mechanism for Syria and for the Syrians themselves to pick and choose how much they want from their friends. I can completely appreciate a very strong sense of sovereignty, of regained sovereignty on the part of this government and frankly the public. They don't want to have a bunch of foreigners coming in, however well-intentioned, to exhort them to do X, Y, and Z, but rather they'd like support and they'd like to chart their course, with collaboration from the foreigners. And that includes the UN. But going back to that term, which I just said we should abandon, nation building, I think we should be ready to push the administration to do some very targeted and focused things that we are really best in brand for doing. It's a certain kind of focus capacity building where this new Syrian state is weakest. For instance, the judiciary, the justice system. I mean, what kind of judiciary has this country had for 50 plus years? Not something that you would recognize as fit and proper for what any state needs, but let alone a post-conflict state, because it goes into the transitional justice and accountability and all of that. But where are Syrians to look for a model? And so I do think we can help with very selective pieces of that. Of course, we have no foreign assistance infrastructure, which is a separate problem. But I do think that we should be looking at Syria with fresh eyes, not going to the Iraq playbook or anything else. But I do believe we should be doing very targeted and collaborative, asking the Syrians themselves first, where do you need and want our help? It may be a mix of private, public sector assistance that comes forward, or we may say, frankly, that's something better left to the French or the Saudis or what have you. And finally, I would just say, it's well and good that Tom Barrack is doing this constant tempo of engagement, but it's got to be wider and deeper on the U.S. diplomatic side, lest you just not have the follow through that you need. And frankly, the pressure on Damascus, holding them accountable for things that they've committed to, or just frankly, things that, whether they're stability issues or just, fairness issues, etc. Last point, I totally subscribe to Charles's points about 2026 is going to be the critical year for dealing with these three key threats to stability. The Israelis have got to be corralled into doing a proper framework, security framework with Damascus, lest they really destabilize the country. And then the integration piece with Sueda and the Northeast right behind it.
That's great, Barbara. Robert, I want to turn to you next. And again, glad to have you pick up the general point of what you do as policy, but I'm really glad that Barbara made that point about the need for expanding our contacts and the base of support. I'm worried about that too. Sustaining this effort, translating it into all kinds of on-the-ground efforts, right? This is going to require more than Tom Barrack. And so again, as the last ambassador, help us to think through what it should look like in terms of moving back to an arrangement where we can be more helpful, sustain this stuff, turn it into operations.
Well, I have good news and bad news.
Just
I'll
give
do
us the good
bad
news and skip the bad
first.
news.
The bad news first, as Barbara so diplomatically stated, security will be an issue within the bureaucracy. Security of American personnel. The good news is there's lots of land available to build a new embassy. And my guess is the Syrian authorities would be helpful that way, in a way that the Assad authorities never were. So more seriously, Charles is exactly right. 40,000 foot work is mostly done, I think, not on the eastern part,
Yes,
but
right.
But I want to talk about that. So what would you do with an expanded diplomatic presence? Why is it useful? Well, two priorities I think we've been talking about are reconstruction of the country and internal stability and security. If you have an embassy, it's not the embassy's job necessarily at all to rebuild Syria. However, there will be American businesses involved, whether in the energy sector, others, maybe the housing sector. There's going to be a Syrian American Chamber of Commerce. They are the best placed to raise American concerns with the business environment, with commercial law application, with corruption that faces American companies. All of those are issues which American companies can and properly should raise with Syrian authorities in order to make the business environment better, not just for American companies, but for all, both Syrian and foreign companies, and that's how the country is going to be rebuilt. But diplomatic staff often have special access, whether it be to the minister or the director general, and they can also have conversations along these lines, often reinforcing what private sector people are saying, and further then saying, if you want help, let us see what kinds of resources are available, but only if there's buy-in, only if there's agreement from the Syrian government. I think that's key. Will there be buy-in? But part of that discussion between American diplomats and Syrian authorities as the reconstruction goes forward, probably in starts and halts, is these are the sorts of problems that are facing companies like American companies. These are what need to be addressed. It's behind closed doors, obviously, but it's to have honest conversations with, you want to do this, here are problems you're having that we see as outside informed observers. I want to spend a little more time talking about the stability issue. I do not see how Damascus and the autonomous administration are going to come to an agreement. It's not moving. And Turkey is certainly not going to be the mediator. There's really only one country I could imagine that would be the mediator. It's obvious. But you can't do that. You cannot do that with periodic visits where you drop in. And Barbara's absolutely right about the public messaging. Federalism is a no-no. Oh, maybe federalism would work. And yes, Barbara, the monarchy thing was very bizarre. So you need staff on the ground, both in Hasakeh and Raqqa, where the autonomous administration institutions are, but you need them also in Damascus. And they need to be communicating with each other and with Washington so that the Americans can, I don't say pass messages, because the Syrians are perfectly capable of passing messages. However, the Americans, without offering an American plan, can at least say, I think you're going to have trouble with this, or maybe that flies, maybe it doesn't, try it. They can offer, again, informed advice. There must not be, I emphasize this, there must not be an American plan to resolve that. The Syrians are perfectly capable of coming up with a plan, however many years and however many stages. They all know each other to a large extent. So they know each other's families. It's the way the country works. So we will never understand Syrians as well as Syrians understand each other. So, but we can play a helpful role, not just at the level of presidential envoy who drops in from time to time, but people that are on the ground and make contacts and build relationships and can offer informed opinion behind closed doors about what works. Similarly, we need that now more than ever between Jerusalem and Damascus. And I don't know how we are able expeditiously to pass advice and informed opinion. For example, what happened during the marches in Damascus of the soldiers who were saying Gaza, which immediately attracted attention in Jerusalem, and it's understandable. But this is precisely the role where an American diplomat in Damascus can share insights with American diplomats in Jerusalem to say, yes, this did happen, and yes, this is a problem, but here's some context. Because I'm not sure the Israelis fully have all the context. They are not on the ground in Damascus having widespread conversations to the best of our knowledge. The Americans, as Charles was saying, it's an incredibly open place right now. And you can have I mean, sometimes you can go into a cafe and not want to have a political discussion. You will have one anyway. So there's a role there for diplomacy, working with CENTCOM in many places, especially when you're trying to deconflict a military situation, where CENTCOM has a real advantage in terms of their technical expertise, what can and can't be done. So, but the great thing about being an ambassador, frankly, is you bring all these different elements of teams, people working on reconstruction, people working on counterterrorism, people working on regional security. You bring them all together and you blend the effort into a coherent single message whole. And they need that, I think, pretty seriously in the next year.
Great. Okay. I'd like to ask 3 questions. We got about 15 minutes before I'd like to turn to the audience. I got 3 questions, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose one of them to each of you, and I would like you to answer it, but you are welcome to comment on the other questions if there's something that you really want to add. I'm certainly not going to stop you from doing so. And Robert, I'm going to start with you, and I want to ask you a question that I think is on the mind of many folks in Washington right now, and some of our allies in the region, which is this question about how do we handle Ahmed al-Shara? How do we handle HTS as the governing authority in Syria? You know, on the one hand, I think that when Damascus fell and the initial statements, there was jubilation, right, all over. End of the Assad regime. And what's more, a new governing group that wanted better relations with all of its neighbors, exactly as Barbara pointed out, that want moderation across the board. This was very, very welcome. Since then, there have been a lot of people who have been raising questions, though, about exactly how far this government is willing to go and how committed to democracy is it, and how committed to democracy is Ahmed al-Shara. I think these are all open questions out there. And you know, if you'd like to predict, if you'd like to tell us exactly what's in Ahmed al-Shara's soul or mind, you know, I'm all ears. But I think there's a more basic question, a more diplomatic question of how do you handle a new governing authority like this, where, again, there's clearly great progress, but also still important questions remaining. And just so you are aware of it, and I think you can figure out what my next 2 questions are, in case you want to add something. The other questions, the questions I'm going to pose to Charles and Barbara, are the question of reconciling the disparate internal bodies, the different minority groups, and how we get at that, and then of course the issue of Israel. And so, you know, Barbara, I'm going to ask you the Israel question, and Charles, I'm going to ask you the internal question. But again, Robert, start us with how we should be handling Shara, HTS, and both the positives, but also the lingering question marks around him.
Well, my understanding is HTS has been disbanded. And so there is a Syrian army composed in many cases of former fighting brigades in the Syrian armed opposition, which are being slowly melded into a whole. Will that happen fast? No. But the whole transition to a more stable permanent government is going to take years. So my big concern is, will one element begin to fight the other element, which is a Libya scenario? So far, we haven't seen that. And we certainly do not want it. That said, I think constant engagement with the Syrian authorities and the autonomous administration, I think, is useful. Wouldn't be bad to have a dialogue with the Hejri people in Soweto as well. I do not think, maybe I'm going to cause controversy, I personally do not think Syria is going to become a democracy in 2026 or even 2027. To be very blunt, Shara himself, although he has called for elections, which is important in terms of his ideological break with Salafi jihadis who reject any elections on ideological grounds, on theological, not ideological, theological grounds. That was huge, but it doesn't mean they're going to be free and fair elections. And his history in Idlib is such that it does not lend one encouragement that there is going to be a free and fair election in Damascus anytime soon. That said, I don't really care. Elections in Iraq did not solve the problems in Iraq. If there is freedom of speech, freedom of thought, including religion, and if people have the right to create associations and to demonstrate peacefully, underline the word peacefully, which is what we were advocating way back in 2011 and 12. If that is respected, Syria can evolve in a more democratic path. Interestingly, the Syrian government seems not to be causing a lot of problems for freedom of expression. There have been 1 or 2 arrest cases, but not many. And they are not interfering, as best I could tell, with people's right to demonstrate peacefully. There was a protest a couple of weeks ago in the Hamadiya market when shopkeepers were angry about their rents. So did the police intervene? No. Did they shoot? No. So that's positive. And I hope that continues. The Americans don't control it. I do think if we had people on the ground, they should be saying to the government, good job, let that continue. By the way, we're hearing of some guy over here in Aleppo or Homs that got harassed. The judge is looking into it. But that's the way we should be engaging with them. Step by step. The whole process is very gradual.
Very good. Charles, take us through the internal piece. You started on it. Obviously, I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about it, a lot of writing about it, but how should we be thinking? How should the US be approaching this question of the need for reconciliation internal to Syria?
So I think I want to focus more on Syria and Syrians. But one note on the US, I think Robert's right in if I understood you right, that the US shouldn't and doesn't have a role in kind of dictating a plan to resolve A, B, or C. I think that's right, although I think we have more of a stake in this SDF one, and I think we should assert ourselves within that. And the other thing I would say is, on all of these issues, in particularly the Northeast and Sweda, both sides on both sides seem to think they have time on their side. And they don't, quite frankly, they don't. The Northeast is not in a great place. Things are very, very tense in certain different areas. And the situation, which I'll come to in Sweda, is very untenable right now. And I'll also explain that. And so I do think we should be being more assertive in as much as we are trying to help to mediate or to encourage talks. Because we have to push back against both sides thinking that they can continue to drag this out. Again, Northeast and in Sweden. Looking domestically, obviously we've had 2 major spikes of violence on the coast in March and in Sweden in July. I don't obviously have the time to get into all the ins and outs of why and how and whatever, but they were both very different. And fundamentally, both were driven by politics, not sect. I think that's really important. Yes, you can find videos here, there, and everywhere where some fighter is saying something sectarian, but the core issue that drove fighting and then violence and atrocities in both cases was fundamentally about the politics of Syria. Is this going to be a federal state? Is it going to be decentralized? Is it going to be centralized? Should Sweda have some special status, as it long thought that it had under the Assads? And of course, what happened in Latakia was it was all triggered by a major sudden assault by anti-government insurgents, which just kicked everything off. I think another really interesting thing to take into consideration is that when Ahmad al-Shara walked into Damascus, one of the first things he said to Syrians is, "I am giving you your country back," which was a kind of revelatory message for Syrians who have never had a stake in their own country. And I think in that moment, it was exactly the right thing to say. But then when you have a situation or situations as we did, both on the coast, when you suddenly had 74 attacks by insurgents on every single government military position on the entire coast, And then in Sweden, where you suddenly had a movement by a branch or a wing of the community who suddenly were pushing against any kind of a deal and abrogating every previous deal that had been negotiated with Damascus, you suddenly had men all across the country, in and out of the government security apparatus, who felt like they had been given their country back and now it was being ripped away by malign actors. So in that sense, it became a very dangerous message that every single Syrian suddenly has a stake in determining the future of their country. And so balancing that tussle internally is very, very difficult. The coast, I think, offers a really important potential source of optimism, which runs very much against the grain of the kind of public narrative. But when you look into all the granular stuff, as I do, and track every single violent incident in the whole country every day, 7 days a week, the coast has gone from being consistently the most violent region of Syria every single week from January until the end of April to the most stable region of the country in the last 4 months, every single week. That's an extraordinary transformation. And most of it is because the local communities and the government through the Ministry of Interior started to engage in very intensive communications. I mean, there are MOI district level officers who every day are meeting with multiple village notables all across the coast, 7 days a week. They never stop. The Ismailis in the center of the country played a crucial mediating role in the early months to start to build confidence. So that's not to say that there aren't still tensions, but that has dramatically reduced violence in the country. And it is mostly due to the government in Damascus making the decision to put their most capable officers on the coast and ordering them to intensively and constantly engage with the local community. So I think if we learn lessons from the coast, we should try to be optimistic that equally challenging areas of the country could experience the same thing. The last couple of things. In terms of the SDF in the Northeast, I am unquestionably, everything I'm hearing from the US side, who are in lots of these meetings, is that the discussions between al-Shara and Mazloum, or between Shaybani and Ilham Ahmed, are always very positive, very constructive. Everyone leaves the room thinking progress was made, and then they go away to their respective sides and nothing happens. And certainly there is an increasing consensus on the US side that there are elements within the SDF who are getting in the way of actually beginning to implement some of the things that are agreed in these discussions in Damascus. And there's growing frustration on the US side that that is what's happening. On the same time, to be blunt, the SDF has been digging tunnels in every single urban center of northeast Syria for the last 9 months. Yeah. The message that sends when you then send a delegation to Damascus to negotiate your integration is confusing, to say the least. You don't then send armored bulldozers to all of your front lines to dig trenches when you are simultaneously, in good faith, negotiating your integration into the state. You also don't arrest nearly 600 Sunni Arab men in the last 9 months for posting on Facebook expressions of support for Damascus, if you are also negotiating in good faith to integrate. So there are real problems, I think, within that. And that's before you come to the issues in Sweden, where this new National Guard militia umbrella, more than half of the leadership are brigadier generals from the Assad regime. 2 of them had Interpol red notices for transnational organized crime. So we've now had a more than 400% increase in captagon trafficking towards Jordan since those forces took control in July. So there are core obstacles in the way when it comes to Sweden and to resolving it, because in many respects, from the government's perspective, it looks like the Assad regime is back. And when we saw what we have seen over the last couple of weeks, and sorry, I'm going on a long time, the Jordanians have been working for months to try to mediate a first meeting between the Druze and the Bedouin. They finally made a breakthrough a couple of weeks ago. And then just as they had agreed on a date, and this was all, secret and very much away from the public, just as they'd agreed on a date and a location in Jordan, unnamed sources suddenly leaked to Arabic media across the region that there was an imminent meeting between the Druze and the Bedouin. You can guess where that came from, because immediately the meeting was cancelled. And then a massive investigation followed in Sweden for over a week. And at the end of that, 10 Druze clerics were arrested by the National Guard, the Druze National Guard, and 2 of them, their dead bodies, tortured from head to toe, were dumped outside the National Hospital. The message being, no dialogue, no contact, no negotiations with Damascus. And so there is major obstacles in the way there in terms of trying to see space to resolve that very much fundamental lack of openness and lack of trust on the Sweda side of things.
Very good. Barbara, you raised Israel, so I'm going to give Israel to you. But help us and look, but Israel is one of those groups, and certainly there are differences among Israelis inevitably. But as I put to Robert, the Israelis have some real doubts about Shara and where this is headed. How do we help? How do we handle this situation? And again, if you'd like to comment on the other issues, you're welcome to.
Yeah, so first of all, on Israel, look, I think it's pretty clear that at the outset, shortly after the change, the flight of Assad, his ignominious flight into exile, and the onset or the arrival of the new Syrian government, represented by this big tent of jihadists, foreign jihadists, Ahmed Shara, etc. So in that period, shortly after, through the opening period of the transition to Trump, the Trump administration, there was just quite open politicking or messaging in multiple channels from the Israelis to the administration that they should essentially reverse course the modest course set by the Biden administration at the end of the Biden administration at the end of its term. They should reverse course, and this was manifested in just the fact that Israelis refused to call Ahmed Shara by his proper name, but it was always Jolani, etc., and stigmatizing him to American officials and to the Congress and others that this was just an unbridled threat in every direction. Now, in that period, interregnum, that went on until the Riyadh revelations, the meeting between Trump and Ashara, the announcement by President Trump that he was intended to lift all sanctions. There was this constant messaging, and it played to a certain sentiment in the administration. Okay, then you had that moment of clarity, but throughout all that period and all the way up till these last couple of weeks, there's been a constant tempo of Israeli airstrikes and other incursions, moving in and raids on and borders in the so-called buffer zone beyond the 1974 armistice line. And Tom Barrack has put a lot of effort over the months of forging trilateral discussions that were openly, acknowledged by the Syrian government in a quite remarkable way, to get to a set of security arrangements, de-escalation, and then a common set of agreements to bring all of this to an end, and from Ashara's side to get the Israelis to roll back across that 1974 line. There was a lot of messaging by the administration, including Barak, in the lead up to Shara's visit, and really since then, that it's very close, very close. He said that again in Manama, at the Manama dialogue a couple weeks ago, that almost there on those arrangements. It doesn't feel like it to me, and Charles may have even more precise information, but it does not feel like they have at all closed that gap. And in not having closed it, the Israelis continue to do all sorts of things which are really animating exactly the kind of ugly spirit in the public that you don't want to see develop. Because I can tell you, we were all struck from the first days, weeks, by the degree to which this new government kept messaging at the highest level, publicly, privately. They wanted no problems with Israel. They didn't have a fight with Israel. They're not taking on the Palestinian cause as a priority. Rather, it's looking inward, securing Syria and addressing its vast economic issues and the integration piece internally. So, I mean, I think there's no other recourse but for the White House to come down very hard and definitively on the Israeli government to stop the bombing and to start making plans to pull back from that border and to get serious and finish this set of discussions. Is it reasonable to have a deconfliction zone that goes all the way up to the outskirts of Damascus? I doubt any Syrian government, any Syrian official is going to agree to that, and I don't think the public will accept this kind of assertion or an assertion of primacy of security over the Druze community. That plays very much along the cleavages that Charles has talked about. So I think it's incumbent on the administration to be really definitive about this and come down hard and settle this in a way that can take a really serious stability threat off the table. I think Charles covered in all the detail you could possibly ask for the primacy of these integration challenges. And again, I think the U.S. has a singular role, certainly in the Northeast, where we have been resident for so long and where we have fostered the development of the SDF and under the wing of the U.S. involvement and presence. And just because of the sort of soft cantonization that has occurred across Syria because of the war, because of Damascus being so focused on its own narrow interests, the growth of a sense of self-governance there. It's not autonomy, but it's been autonomy-like for all these years. I fully agree with Robert. This is not something that we need to offer plans for. We can be an honest, facilitator where it's necessary or needed, but this is a Syrian issue, but we should make it clear, at least privately, that we regard this as a really critical stability piece that we can't do for them. They don't ask us to do it for them, but managing Turkey's pressures for Damascus will go directly to the degree to which they can manage that relationship with Northeast Syria, both the SDF and the civil administration side of it, in an effective way. I think the Iraqi Kurds, the KDP, has been very helpful in that respect, and so I think we can help foster movement forward. But you also just need more people on the ground to do that. So I think I'll stop there so we can get to questions.
Thank you, Barbara. All right, so let's turn to questions from the audience, both online here and here. I'm going to try to alternate back and forth. For those of you who are online, please feel free to type questions either into the chat or the Q&A function. My staff here are pulling questions and handing them to me, but we're going to start with a question here in the room. As I said, we'll alternate. Please, and please do identify yourself to the questioners, and please do ask a concise question out of respect for everybody else in the room who'd like to get their questions into. Please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe, and I'm a global affairs journalist. Dr. Polak, you were a guest on my show, and we discussed what is the next phase of the Middle East. What would be the situation for the Middle East, specifically in Syria, given the new national strategy that has been published? And one key point related to what we are discussing today is the retreat of the United States from the Middle East. What does that say about the retreat from Syria or in the Middle East? Is it just publicity at this point, or does it really make sense?
Okay. Barbara, you want to take that one?
Sure. So on the one hand, I, like many other people, have looked at that national security strategy closely, found it very wanting in many respects, and also internally contradictory and in some large measure incoherent. I think that to sum up the piece on the Middle East, assumes that a certain durability to the peace efforts or the, stabilization efforts, whether it's peace in Gaza or stabilization of Syria, assumes far too much, and that things will roll on as they are. I think in the case of Syria, however, Tom Barak is going to continue to, to be the bulldozer he is, that will help keep a certain momentum of U.S. engagement. But, overall, I think, so I do separate the two, because Syria, this first year is, it's a success story, and you've got the structure of an envoy who can continue to make sure that there is due attention paid to it. But I think overall, the NSS, figures as an indication of U.S. retreat, no question, from many places. It's silent in large respects on Africa, and the contradictions about maintaining supremacy, et cetera, of influence is very much undercut by all the drastic destruction of both soft power tools as well as evisceration of the cadre of the national security human capital. And frankly, at last count, if you count Syria as one of the countries with which we have relations now, so there are 17 places where we could have embassies with ambassadors. But I think we've only got 5 confirmed ambassadors, maybe 6 if I've left somebody off, but, and no apparent effort underway to fill those other posts. So yeah, the NSS in a sense matches some of the approaches that the administration has already demonstrated. But I think Syria is a bit of an outlier in that respect.
Very good. All right, so I'm going to now take a question from online. Robert, I think this one is from you. Asked to remain anonymous, but it's someone you know. In the early 90s, Islamists looked poised to win elections in Algeria, ambassador in Algeria. They were prevented. They launched a civil war. The U.S. was basically a bystander at that moment. In December 2024, Islamists won the Syrian civil war after a lengthy period of direct U.S. intervention to prevent Islamist ascendancy in the region. What does this say about the effectiveness of America's role?
Oh, I like that question. So I think this is a really important point. The future of the Middle East is not in the hands of the United States. It's in the hands of the people who live there. And I think when we talk about nation building or not doing nation building, in a sense, we're simply re-emphasizing that point. In the end, in Algeria, after a very nasty civil war, not on the scale of Syria, mercifully, but still a very nasty civil war, enough Algerians rallied around a somewhat reformist president who announced amnesties and brought the country back together. The Americans actually had very little to do with that. In Syria, I don't know that our intervention was massive, but it was important. But again, group that we really opposed took power. I'm glad that, starting with the Biden administration, the Trump administration then has recognized that reality and looked for how to work on a practical level towards shared interests. And I think the national security strategy's emphasis on Syria as a factor of regional stability is right, and regional security. And if they can work with the Syrian government and with more and more important regional actors as the United States retrenches, Israel, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, it's a long list, Egypt, will become more important. And there is still a way for the Americans to work with all of them, even if we don't have big boots on the ground, or if we're not providing big billions of dollars. America's voice, we can still be heard.
Okay.
Put it that way.
All right, let me take another one from the audience. Take right over here. If you want to wait to the...
Islam Abdurrahman from Strategy Forum. Thanks for the speakers, very good panel indeed. My question is, and I'm building in the notion that there has been direct military engagement, especially from CENTCOM with the new Syrian government. Is there any plans or any thinking about building on this, about, especially with the talk about the new Syrian army, about training, equipment, some formal rule from the United States, and I think this is a very important place that the US can play a role, about engaging, about shaping this new security force over there?
Charles, do you want to take this one?
Sure. I guess this gives me an opportunity to say something I should have said a little earlier, which is to differentiate, in Syria's terms, the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Interior. I'm about to speak in big generalities, so let's acknowledge that there were plenty of exceptions to this. But in the first several months of the transition, the Ministry of Defense was very much the dominant actor in Syria. It ran the checkpoints, it ran the military responses to incidents all across the country. This was one of the core reasons, frankly, why all hell broke loose on the coast in March. That the Ministry of Defense is a very complicated beast. You know, it has all of the remnants of all of the armed groups and the very broad spectrum of different backgrounds, geographies, allegiances went under the Ministry of Defense umbrella. So to be frank, a lot of the complications that Syria faced in the first few months was because the MOD was the frontline response force for any number of different challenges. What we've seen take place really in the second half of this year is that the MOD is basically, again, speaking in very simplistic terms, being put behind bases. The divisions have all been given their different geographic theatres of responsibility. And now there's much more been a focus on making sure that everyone is receiving salaries, they're receiving training. We now have programs where both Saudi Arabia and Turkey are taking equal numbers of military officers away for military training. But what we've really seen, I think, is because the MOD is so complicated, it has kind of been put to the side for a while. With the exception of Turkey, which has signed the military accord, as I'm sure you probably know, and has offered a great deal of other potential areas of assistance, logistical resources, weapons, and everything else. I don't think we've actually seen much of that actually happen, except for the training for now. But it is a complicated actor. And I think, and I forget who was saying this earlier, but the DDR process of figuring out how all these factions dissolve, they lose their previous factional allegiances and biases and what have you, is going to take a really long time. So actually, this process of kind of placing the MOD behind bases has been a good development. In that place, and I'm going to sort of switch my answer to your question by focusing more on the Ministry of Interior, which has emerged as not just the domestic internal security actor, which in other environments is exactly what the MOI should be. If there are checkpoints in areas of Syria, they are now controlled by the MOI. Local policing, the public or internal security, all under Ministry of Interior command and control. Counter-narcotics, counter-terrorism, all under MOI control. And so as a result of that, this frontline stance taken by the MOI, it's the MOI that's had much more international interest in terms of providing assistance. Quite frankly, if the US was, which it may be interested in providing training to the Ministry of Defense, that becomes more of a sensitive issue because the Defense Ministry typically looks outside of Syria rather than inside. And so right now, it's not necessarily the right signal to send, which is why we have had the Brits, the French, the Americans, and others engage quite intensively with the Ministry of Interior. There have been offers for training, offers of capacity building, logistics, to basically build up the infrastructure, because as the anecdote I always say is when the current Interior Minister walked into the Interior Ministry building, one of the first things they found was 8.5 million files on wanted Syrians inside and outside the country, about a third of the entire population, about half of the adult population of Syria. Now, that's staggering, but those 8.5 million files were paper. There was nothing on a computer system. And so in terms of US or other assistance, it doesn't just have to be, rifles and bullets. It can be computers, printers, like really starting at the most basic and staffing up in terms of the capacity of the MOI to actually do its job. And so, yeah, I'll just end by just emphasizing everything that Commander Cooper spoke about in terms of cooperation with the Syrian government is through the MOI, everything. And there is a lot more that's happening that isn't being publicly acknowledged, but it is all through the MOI. And I think that's the actor that we should be paying more attention to, because they have all the responsibility for all these domestic issues. If problems arise along the border with Sweda or with the SDF, the MOI is the force that's actually predominantly there. If all hell breaks loose, the MOD may be unleashed, but it's the MOI that has the responsibility of making sure that escalation doesn't happen. And so I think we need to pay more attention in that direction.
Very good. So I'm going to take another online. This is from our friend Peter Galbraith. And Robert, I'm going to pitch it to you, but it's a very important question. So Barbara, Charles, if you'd like to comment on it, you're welcome to as well. Peter's asking, the SDF has said that the future structure of Syria, whether it's centralized, decentralized, federal, state, whatever it may be, should be decided in a constitution written by an elected constituent assembly. Should the U.S. support an elected constituent assembly as the proper way to settle the fundamental questions of Syria's future? Robert, what do you think?
It's obviously ideal. It's obviously ideal. I also have to say to Peter, the country hasn't had free and fair elections in a very, very long time. And let's be honest, there is no political leader on the scene in Syria now, not in Damascus, not in Raqqa and Hasakeh, and certainly not in Sweda, who has democratic intentions. And so if the point of holding elections is simply to reconfirm the existing authorities, I'm not sure that we gain much, frankly speaking, to be very blunt. By contrast, if in a couple of years, and I say years, civil society, both in the western part of the country and in Sweda and in the autonomous administration areas, if civil society and political parties are up and running and able to do normal political campaigning without interference from the authorities, that's different. And that would be ideal. But we're not going to have that anytime soon. So, which is why I think the Constitution necessarily is probably best left another few years down the road. But that requires that the political actors around the country coalesce around some kind of Syrian plan for how to go forward.
Charles, Barbara, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree that, the likelihood of elections that will then give you the sort of the mechanism to sort exactly such a sensitive issue is several years away. And so, but the country can't wait to have some kind of interim arrangement that is, collaboratively arrived at, that's negotiated and it's made clear it's a measure to get to what is a very neuralgic set of volatile conditions in Sweda and in the Northeast, but messaging that it will be in due course, the outcome of a formal constitutional or democratic process. But I don't think you can. I think Robert's right. There's got to be some preparatory work to bring the country ready to that point. But you also don't want to leave the boiling pot simmering and then coming up to a low boil and then a high boil without something.
No, it's okay. All right, let's take another one from here in the room. Okay, please.
I'm Sina Mohammed, representative of Syria Democratic Council here in Washington. Thank you so much for the panelists, all the panelists. My question is, now we are talking about business and economic in Syria. How can we build business without stability? So far, we don't have any stability in Syria. We are seeing what's going on for the Sweda, for the Alawite on the coast, and even for the autonomous administration, they are not involved yet. We are very keen, we are very intent to implement the agreement of 10th of March between President Shara and General Mazloum. As the autonomous administration, they wanted to be, in this integration, but it looks like Damascus, they have not this intention to continue on it. This is what we heard from the leaders of the SDF and the autonomous administration. They are willing to discuss and negotiate with Damascus, but unfortunately, Damascus is not showing any steps forward. We want to build Syria together. We don't want to be like before, just one color, as we see now. So we want to have the integration for all the Syrian people, the component of Syrian in the new government, inclusive government, and democratic government. So far, we didn't hear the word of democracy from this new government, unfortunately. But as I said, we want to help the government now in Damascus to build the new Syria together. Alone, they can't do it. So we are very interested in that. How can we build the stability, and how can we make business to build our country again? Thank you so much.
Charles, you want to take this one? Tough one.
I think echoing a lot of what Robert had said, I think early on, is everything's going to take time. I mean, to expect that Syria will be peaceful after 53 years of Assad's regime, which played, as you know, minorities against minorities, minorities against majorities, villages against villages for half a century, in which politics was forbidden. Stability is going to take time. The fact that we have had as much interest from the business world as we have in the first 12 months, despite ongoing instability, I think is also a sign, though, that there are significant constituents around the world that see Syria as a huge opportunity. So yes, when we have contracts signed, not MOUs, contracts, it is taking time for those contracts to come to fruition. But what we have seen is, out of I forget how many $1 billion of the deal was, but of the big 5 power plants that are going to be built across the country, 3 of them have already had their foundations laid. Things are starting to move forward. And I think that's a pragmatic decision by business entities and investors, which is taking into consideration that total stability is going to take a long time. There is also the sort of chicken before the egg thing here, which is, to get stability, you also need business, you need investment, people need jobs. You can't wait for stability before you have investment and business, because you'll be waiting forever. And I think the added element here is, and we can agree to disagree on the negotiations, but frankly speaking, the US diplomats working on a lot of this, as well as the US military, feel like there are a great deal more obstacles on the northeast side in terms of implementing the framework agreement from March. But nevertheless, the greatest source of stability for Syria will be resolving that issue. I mean, 80% of the oil and gas resources are in northeastern Syria, but almost all of them are so heavily damaged that they are a million miles away from being able to produce to full capacity. So if we want to ask, how does the Syrian economy get started again, and how do people decide to take a job instead of holding a rifle, answering that integration question is absolutely crucial. And so I think that's where we all have to be patient and pragmatic. And like Robert said, there is no democracy in any corner of Syria. We can put the democracy in our name, but it doesn't mean that we're democratic. And I think we need to give Syria the space, all of Syria, not different corners of Syria, the space to get to there, but it is going to take time.
Very good. Let me take one more question from online. We've only got a couple of minutes. Barbara, I'll start with you, I think, on this one. How do you see the dynamics between the new Syria and Lebanon? Another difficult relationship to negotiate.
Well, look, I mean, tentative, but but going in the right direction, and really again to touch upon a theme that both Robert and Charles have very deftly underlined. You have to look at the wider span of history of the Assad's rule, their terrible rule, and what used to be the model of the relationship, which was a very predatory Damascus vis-a-vis a very enfeebled by Hezbollah, enfeebled by many factors, including venal Lebanese politicians, but an enfeebled Lebanon that was very much, cat's paw of Syria. So that has, the sort of developments in both countries have, for the first time in 4 or 5 decades, provided a space for them to each in their own right pursue a course of political transition. And I do believe firmly that success on either side of the border can be reinforcing for the other side of the border. But again, I do think that this requires, first of all, a lean in by key states in the region. There's much less of that on vis-a-vis Lebanon. I think there's still too much sitting on the sidelines and waiting for the Lebanese to do what they have to do vis-a-vis a weakened but still resilient Hezbollah, disarming and so forth. And then, much more lean in on the other side. And that's good in terms of what Syria needs. But I think there's got to be a more collaborative effort by key Arab states, Saudis, Qataris, Emiratis, others, to provide the positive pressure alongside the sort of tough rhetorical public line of pressure that the U.S. is putting on Lebanon. Syria, to my money, for years I've thought of it as the keystone in the arch of larger regional stability and security. And again, not just for the neighborhood, importantly for Lebanon, very importantly for Jordan and Israel and Turkey, but its success will breed success in myriad directions, including in Lebanon.
Great. I'm afraid we're out of time. In just a moment, I'm going to ask you to join me in thanking this. But before then, we're going to take a break now. We're going to have a break until 11:15. Please feel free, refresh yourselves. Probably too cold to go out into the courtyard, but you're welcome to. But before we do so, please join me in thanking this fantastic panel. Yeah.
Can you let me know when am I on? Am I on now? When my mic is on? Okay. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Elizabeth Hagedorn. I'm diplomatic correspondent at Al Monitor, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this panel, Charting a Path Forward in the New Syria. As we look towards Syria's critical next chapter, our discussion will explore what a sustainable economic, political, and social recovery could look like, and how Syrians both at home and abroad are shaping that future. So please join me in welcoming our excellent panelists who will unpack the challenges and opportunities facing Syrians as they rebuild and reimagine their country. Down here, we have Mohammed Al-Ghanem, the Policy Director at the Syrian American Council. Next, we have Celine Kassim, a human rights activist and the co-founder of Syria Now. And finally, we have Jay Salkini, the President and CEO of the U.S. Syria Business Council. Thanks to the three of you for being here. And for our audience, please be thinking of questions. We'll have about 15 minutes at the end for those. Okay, Celine, I'd like to start with you. You moved back to Syria this summer. Tell us, what is the mood on the ground and what are people talking most about? Is it jobs? Is it safety? Is it justice?
Thank you guys so much for this opportunity. I actually just landed here a couple hours ago, straight from Damascus after the celebrations on December 8th. The square was filled with millions of Syrians celebrating, dancing, jumping up and down from buildings on top of people, on top of each other. It's extremely surreal to be there now. A year ago today, if you would have asked me that I would have moved there, I would have been like, what are you talking about? So yeah, I graduated my master's in May, and I had thought that when is a better time to actually move to my country than now. I never lived in Syria, so this is my first experience living in Syria. I was born in the diaspora and I lived in the US and Canada and ended up now there. So it's extremely surreal to be there today. And the mood online and what you guys see over here is extremely different as to what people are experiencing or thinking in their day-to-day life, in their homes, in their responsibilities, what they want to get better, what they want to hear from the government or from different foreign friends or non-friends that we're creating today. And the mood is overall, that I am extremely happy to say this, but overall it is optimistic too today. There are people that I do believe sometimes have this kind of selfish understanding of reality, and they go back to like, oh, things were better before, or things are now getting into the way of how we run our business or how we do this and how we do that. But overall, society in its whole has been very optimistic. And I've been to most provinces by now. There was a bunch of different campaigns that happened all over different provinces. I don't know if you guys saw, of people's own provinces raising money for their own provinces. So for example, in Idlib, they raised $300 million. And now they're working on the Aleppo one. They did the Homs one, they did the Damascus one. And it was insane to see this kind of people coming together to want to build their country by their own hands and not waiting for folks from the outside, which we will get into, to come in and kind of save us. But that just shows us how much Syrians as themselves want to move forward and want to build their country and want to finally be able to live in peace and in prosperity and to work on themselves.
And one thing I wanted to talk to you about is just the societal damage left over from the Ba'athist era. I mean, based on your conversations with young people, how are they starting to rebuild trust with one another after years of, propaganda and surveillance and war?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote my thesis on the culture of fear and how the Assad Ba'athist regime, as Charles said earlier, They worked extensively hard on divide and conquer and how they made us hate each other and how they never allowed us to get to know each other. Syrians got to know each other in the outside when they became refugees or immigrants outside Syria. The Damascene never got to meet or live with the person from Aleppo, et cetera, et cetera. So today it's going to take time. Again, we go back to the patience piece. But still, people do not trust each other, whether that's people on a societal level or people on the civil society level or the government and the people and different aspects of that. So that is there. And then if we look at the dialogue conference that happened in the beginning of the fall, after the fall, it could have been way better. And then we talk about dialogue between different aspects of society that also could be way better. But something that happened the other day in the EU Day of Dialogue, it happened a couple weeks ago, and we were all there as civil society, as journalists, as Syrians, and also there was a representative from the government on each panel, on each discussion, and they discussed aspects from justice to the constitution, et cetera, et cetera. The main thing that everyone kept bringing up is that there needs to be conversation, there needs to be dialogue between all aspects of society. So this is something, but then we as civil society came to kind of understand that we shouldn't wait for the government to make this happen, and we need to be working on it ourselves. In an aspect where we organize these dialogues, we get to know each other, whether that's youth, whether that's justice organizations, whether that's education, development, whatever it is. If we don't know each other, if we don't know that, the person that has lived in Damascus also suffered and also was a victim, and it's not kind of this competition of like who lived the worst 15 years. To get to know that, we'll be able to work together. And an example of this is when things broke out actually in Germana. There was like a civil kind of committee that organized for security to be from the locals and then from people that came from the outside. And when they got to sit together and eat together and kind of stay up the whole night protecting their city together, they became friends. And it was a really nice example of how this happens, is that when we get to know each other, things move forward and we are able to move along.
This past year has seen an extraordinary shift in the U.S.-Syria relationship, culminating in President Shara's visit to the White House and the upcoming repeal of the Caesar Act. Mohammed, walk us through how you and others in the advocacy community helped build momentum for closer U.S.-Syria ties this year, and where do you see the relationship going forward?
Thanks so much, Elizabeth, for the kind introduction. And I wanted to take the opportunity to thank Charles and the Middle East Institute for an excellent conference. The first panel was super informative, and we hope that we can do an equally good job. So it honestly, the past year has been surreal. So on December 7th of 2024, a day before the regime fell, I was in Doha, happened to be in Doha for the Doha Forum. I didn't go to the Doha Forum to just simply attend the forum, but lots of governments had converged on the Doha Forum at the time, United States, the UK, even the Russians. So we went there because we were trying to influence American decision-making and global decision-making. The following day, the regime fell, collapsed, Bashar al-Assad fled. So I got on a plane and left for Lebanon because there was no Damascus International Airport at the time. It wasn't operational, left for Damascus, and I drove over, left for Beirut, and I drove over to Damascus. So I got to see Syria the way it was under the Assad regime, Damascus the way it was under the Assad regime. And since then, I've been shuttling between DC and Damascus I've been there about 5 or 6 times. Met with President Shara multiple times, Foreign Minister Shaybani multiple times, every single cabinet member, and also lots and lots of grassroots meetings, because we also opened an office in Damascus. So we have sort of like that base of operations in Damascus. Now, on December 8th, before, of course, we were all super euphoric. This is something that we had, worked for so many years. And finally it happens. Bashar al-Assad flees the country. He's in Moscow. So all of us were still in a state of shock, but we had to do also some long-term thinking. So we did an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and we issued the first ever call for lifting sanctions on Syria. And that happened on December 8th, 2024, the same day the regime fell. And I would give tremendous credit to the Syrian American community for the tremendous advocacy they have done the past year. Now, because of what I do, I'm a director of government affairs, so I spend a ton of time. I'm based out of DC, and I spend a ton of time on the Hill. I've had a front row seat to this transformational journey. Now, I can tell you that when Ambassador Leaf decided to go to Damascus and meet with Shara, there was a lot of opposition here in Washington, D.C. to our visit. And I'm sharing this just to give you a glimpse into the transformation of American policy towards Syria over the past year. I spoke with some members of Congress then and with some staffers on the Hill then, and they felt that Ambassador Leaf was sort of like giving up the cards they had and that they were going to need in 2025, giving up leverage. So they were not happy with the visit. We were, of course, super happy that the visit happened. But I recall briefing some members of Congress at the time from Damascus, and they were discussing and telling me that they're thinking to counter Ambassador Leaf's trip to Damascus, they were thinking of enacting more sanctions. So I really had to explain to them what, the immiseration that I had encountered in Damascus, how tough, really tough daily life in Syria was, the poverty, the abject poverty. And so by the end of the briefing, they were like, oh, maybe we have enough sanctions. Maybe we don't need more sanctions at the moment. So that was the starting point. We advocated multiple agencies, and we had good allies. Charles today mentioned the deep bench in the bureaucracy. I would also like to give him a shout out, tremendous credit. Good men and women within the American government, inside and outside the American government, insiders and outsiders, worked with us. We got General License 24. General License 24 afforded us breathing room. Why? Because keep in mind, the folks who were in power in Damascus, December 2024 and January 2025, were designated as terrorists. The government itself was also under a lot of sanctions. So even sometimes people were afraid of mere dialogue with the government, for fear of running afoul of laws about providing material support to terrorism. So with General License 24, the sanctions were paused on the government for 6 months. So our community was able to go to meet with the government, to meet with the new the president, and to provide help, provide assistance. So we saw lots of Syrian American delegations going to Damascus and meeting with the government. Now so we got General License 24, but then we ran into opposition. Of course, our objective was unconditional lifting of sanctions on Syria. Why? Because my first ever visit to Damascus made me realize, it's not like I didn't know, but it's always different when you see things for yourself. It made me realize that there was a clear and present danger of the country quickly morphing into another Sudan or another Libya. What do I exactly mean by that? We had a lot of armed groups running around, so many different desperate groups. I met with the president, and he spoke to us about his plan for bringing everyone under the umbrella of the Department of Defense, but it was a very tall order. So it was clear to me that this situation could quickly really become descend into civil war, and that people needed jobs, that we needed to help to get the economy going. So we really had to work around the clock and burn the candle at both ends here in Washington, D.C. to get those sanctions lifted. However, within government, at the time, deep skepticism. When the Trump administration first came in, they actually instructed their diplomats not to initiate any communication, not to engage in any communication first couple of months. But then Secretary Rubio changed his position, which was very good. And again, I'm speaking here about two camps. One camp came up with a plan of 12, 13 conditions, sort of like something similar to the step-for-step plan. If Damascus were to do this, we would do that. If Damascus were to reform on this issue, we would do that. And we knew that Syria was in the ER. Syria was in the ICU. There was simply no time. We didn't have the luxury of time. Had we waited, had sanctions not been lifted, yes, there was a great, the prospect of another civil war was very, very, very real. Now, of course, you've all heard and seen and read about the Saudi role, which was super helpful, particularly on the part of Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, also Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who spoke with President Trump 52 days before his decision to lift sanctions and President Trump asked him for help with Ukraine. President Erdogan asked Trump in return for help with Syria. And when President Erdogan said, would love for you to help us with lifting sanctions on Syria, President Trump said, I don't mind. And that was the first time ever we had heard this, something to that effect emphatically from the president. Now, keep in mind, just a couple of months prior, the Israeli prime minister floated a plan in DC, spoke with lawmakers and said the best case scenario for Syria is for Syria to remain weak and divided. And so this was the alternative vision. Our vision was no, help get the economy going, lift sanctions. The other vision was to keep Syria destabilized, which we believe is not in America's interest. And so there was this tussle. There was this pitched diplomatic battle between our vision and the other vision. So again, you've heard about the Saudi and Turkish role, but what you may not have seen is actually the role of the Syrian American diaspora. Lots of Syrian American organizations, methodically reached out to lawmakers, including some lawmakers who were not on board with this program whatsoever. We sat down with for example, Senator Graham 3 times. I had extensive discussions with him, other lawmakers, and sort of like slowly but surely were able to change minds on the Hill. And of course, this journey has now culminated in today's upcoming vote on the NDAA that includes the provision to fully and unconditionally repeal Caesar. So we couldn't be more happy about this. Hopefully, of course, there's going to be a lag between the lifting of sanctions and the global private sector also engaging with the economy, but we couldn't be more happy. It has been very tough. It's been very draining. It was never inevitable, never preordained. It took a lot of work, but we're so happy that we got to this point. And hopefully before Christmas, we're going to celebrate, when the president signs the NDA, we're going to celebrate Syria in 2026 free from all sorts and manners of sanctions.
Thank you for that overview. That transitions us well to Jay. Looking beyond the repeal of the Caesar Act, how can the U.S. most constructively support Syria's economic recovery? And in general, what do you see as the biggest opportunities for growth?
Well, thank you very much for having me. My name is Jay Salkini. I'm the chairman of the U.S. Syria Business Council. I wear 2 hats. On the other hat is I'm the founder and CEO of a telecommunication company called T-Core Networks. And we deployed the network on the border of Turkey that covered about 800 miles from Cenderes to Jarablus. And we were able to build that under General License 22. So as my friend Mr. Ghanem was mentioning, when General License 24 came around, we were able to bring that network that we built and integrated with SyriaTel. And now we connected the country from the areas that are still using the lira, the Turkish lira, with the Syrian pound. So that's what we've done in the past, and now we're expanding our 4G and 5G network into the rest of the country. That's on the T-Core side. On the U.S. Syria Business Council, we concentrate on interconnecting and connecting companies from the U.S. and from Syria together, so we can bring businesses from the U.S. and take it to Syria and bring Syrian businesses into the U.S. Some of the challenges that we have seen in Syria right now that I don't know how many of you have been in Syria, but I give you statistics because I'm an engineer and I like to share numbers. I'm not as good as Mr. Ghanem and Mr. Charles speaking out of their mind. So I'm going to give you a little statistics. We have 3 industrial zones in Syria right now. Each one of these industrial zones is about 500 factories right now, and another 500 that are not in business. They're not in business because these factories moved out of Syria into neighboring countries. We would like to bring these countries, these factories back from whether Turkey, Iraq, and Lebanon, because the export that Syria has been providing to their product is being taken out of Syria by cars, by trucks, and being shipped out of neighboring countries. So these factories employ 500,000 people right now. And it's very important to understand what are the wages right now and the unemployment percentage in Syria. We're looking at about 50% plus unemployment. Let me give you statistics on the wages. Factory worker today, his salary is $100 a month to $300 a month. A farmer makes $75 a month in salary to $200 a month. A manager, a private in the military makes $250 a month. Okay, a security guard makes $100 to $300. A driver makes $150 to $400. A corporate lawyer, please don't go get a job, you lawyers, $300 to $600 a month. So you can imagine how these people are living on these low wages and still have to buy their iPhone, their internet, their pay for the electricity, and the electricity right now is no longer, or there is a huge reduction in subsidy on electricity. So the electricity has gone high, the mobile services have gone high, and we see the countries is basically back trying to, even the bread has been, they remove subsidies on this. So a lot of changes has taken place in the past year. And what we need out of the US is continuous support, continuous funding, more grants to bring US companies, US technology into Syria, because one of the things that we have right now is we have a lot of Chinese companies that have taken advantage, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Libya, whether it's Somalia, whether it's Iraq. We see all the work that the US government does, open the door, and then these companies, Chinese companies come in, and then we have unsecured factories and telecom and facilities. So we would like to get that in place as soon as possible.
Celine, I'd like to bring you in on that. Tell us more, if you could, about some of the daily hardships that Syrians are facing. I mean, what are the biggest obstacles to employment and basic services in Syria right now?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that everyone is talking about is employment. There is no jobs. There's no, especially the youth that are like my age and younger. It's so bad. Every day I get, tons of messages of kids being like, do you have any online jobs for people outside coming in, et cetera, et cetera. So the main thing is jobs. And as Jay was saying, all of these different things have now started to cost more, because I think the reason, and I spoke with Minister Haykel about this, apparently they're doing this to be able to bring in more money into these sectors and bring in investment, et cetera. But, your basic phone service now is going to cost you maybe up to $100, and people do not have this. People don't have the ability to, and like they're working 3 different jobs, the driver and this and the whole family's working all these jobs to be able to make it. And then if you want to talk about electricity, again, everyone has solar panels. People have to get these batteries that charge when the electricity comes. And I had to do that when I went. You buy this battery and then you get an inverter, and then that's how it charges when it's gone. And then you link your fridge on it, and it's like this whole complicated system that we're trying to understand still. But and then the water in the summer was really, really bad. One of the main sectors that people are not talking about, especially now with investment and with money coming into the country, our country is an agricultural country. And then you have people coming in from the outside. It's like, oh, we want these towers and these nice, huge resorts for people to come in. And hey, okay, that's cool, but we need to delve into the agriculture industry, because Syria is a fertile land. That's how our economy ran before all of this destruction. It's a very agricultural land, and all of our farmers are now And this was a part of in 2011, you know, they moved to the cities to be able to make money because of the drought, because of there was no water, there was no access to that. So I think that this is a huge sector that no one is really talking about or delving into, and I think that we should all call for it. So the agriculture and the water. I mean, me, myself, the water cuts off, you have to call a guy and then he brings in the thing and then they fill up your barrel with water. And this happens all the time. And yeah, we're coming into the winter now. There's a bunch of camps that have not been emptied out yet. People have nowhere to come back to. And then when we speak about sanctions and all of that, rebuilding, I mean, I don't know how we're going to rebuild all of this and then where these millions of people are going to go during that time. So this is another thing also that people are not bringing into.
Mohammed, Celine just mentioned the issue of housing and people having nowhere to return to. With sanctions now lifted or being lifted, what economic priorities do you want to see the new Syrian government tackle first to stabilize livelihoods and attract this investment?
I would start with the provision of the most basic needs. So I completely concur with my colleagues here. When you're in Damascus, going through daily life is really tough. So here, for example, you take for granted that you can take a shower anytime you want because all you have to do is, just turn the tap and, and you have water, maybe hot water too. That's not the case in Damascus, okay? And by the way, when I say Damascus, that's not because I'm oblivious of the rest of the country. I'm talking about Damascus because it's supposed to be the capital and it's supposed to be the place with the best services, right? So if that's the situation in the capital, you can only imagine what the situation is in the rest of the provinces. And so, no, water, there's a huge issue with water. There's a huge issue with electricity, and you have to plan. My sister, who lives in Damascus, has to plan her entire life around the time, she can turn the lights on. So this is very draining. Plus, you have to wait in line for hours and hours in front of an ATM in order to be able to withdraw the equivalent of $10. Whether you're an individual or a business, there's not enough money supply, meaning in simple terms, not enough banknotes, and so lots of things that we take for granted are struggles, daily struggles. So I would start with of course, with the provision of the most basic services. And then I would say lots of people who would like to return, but it's hard to return. There's nothing to return to because, even if you want to rebuild your homes and your houses, because they're destroyed, for example, in Jobar, which is a suburb of Damascus. Actually, it's part of Damascus proper. It's not a suburb. No, it's part of Damascus proper. It's just, access to material. It's tough. So I would want the government to prioritize facilitating that, attracting more foreign investment through more transparency, a more structured economy, a more exact economic policy in 2026. But certainly from talking to people every single day and from judging by the time I spent there, I would say start with the provision of the most basic services.
Jay, corruption was a major issue in pre-war Syria. Is that still a concern for investors? And what cultural or systemic obstacles should international investors be aware of?
Wow, corruption. That's a big word in Syria or in the Middle East in general. Syria was, corruption was everywhere. Today, from the 3 trips I've taken, I've seen zero corruption, which was surprising. There were a couple of instances in one of the companies that I was working with, and it seems that the government got alerted to that. And the people that were part of that, they were isolated immediately and let go. So there seems to be a huge step forward in fighting corruption. And as we generate more jobs, as we create more opportunities for people, we see that the corruption is being eliminated. For instance, we saw judges' salaries being increased from a few $100s a month into $1,200 a month. That judge that used to take corruption, that used to take bribes, is no longer going to take bribes because $1,200 is a very nice salary for a judge. So as we improve wages, as we get people to work, so one of the things that the Business Council has been promoting and asking the Syrian government is, why don't we start building free trade zone arrangement areas in Syria? And then, as I said before, we have 1,500 factories right now in working and producing, and we're looking at expanding that into about 3,000 factories. And having 500,000 people working and getting good salaries is a great thing. So how do we get these factories to start working? Well, first of all, they need to be able to export, not just produce product for the local market. So one of the things that the U.S.-Syria Business Council has been able to do is we've been able to convince the U.S. Commerce, Department of Commerce, and the U.S. The Syrian Economy Minister of Economy to work together and work on the reduction of tariffs. So I don't know if you've heard, but during the president's visit here, he leaked out a confidential arrangement between him and President Trump that the tariffs going to be reduced from 41 to 10%. Having 10% tariffs in Syria is a huge advantage for Syria, because now with the low labor cost, to produce products, guess what? The Chinese are now asking, can we bring in a factory from China, put it inside Syria, so we can start exporting out of Syria under the 10% tariffs? So this is a huge step forward. So to get these factories to start exporting, we need two things. We need the banking, okay, to start, the money start flowing in and out, so they can get products out. And that's what my friend Samir here, who manages the U.S.-Syria Business Council, has been able to do, is set up a couple of roundtables with all the international banks. In June, we had 16 of the major international banks on the roundtable. And yesterday, actually, we had about 18 of them from all over the world joining us to discuss how we're gonna get the banking sector back into Syria, so we can get these factories kickstart and get them back in business. And can you imagine a bottle of oil, instead of paying today $25, it's going to be down to $15? I mean, that's a huge shift. One of the products that Ms. Britton just imported from Syria is wine. So, last year, I think she applied, she was blocked, and Syria has only one wine called Bargelos. And she applied to import that wine, and it was blocked by sanctions. Finally, she got the license, and now she imported the wine here. Well, the wine, the bottle was, let's say, $50. At 41% tariffs that she's paying right now, the bottle is $100. So that gives you an example about the magnitude, whether olive oil, whether wine, whether plastic, whether, produce. We see a lot of produce coming from Jordan, from Palestine, from, we see the tomatoes sitting at the store. All that, if we have 10% tariffs out of Syria, then all the agriculture and all these, mountains will be back, because we have a major problem right now in Syria. People in Latakia and Tartus and the mountains, they're back, they're out of the military now, going back into that region, and they have no jobs. So we need to get them back to work. We need to get the produce. We need to get the land back, the olive oil trees that were stolen and sent to neighboring countries. We need those olive trees back, or we need to regrow more olive trees so we can generate more and more export out of Syria. And I think that will put the people back to work. That will reduce terrorism and reduce, access to, low wages people that, were corrupt or were receiving kickbacks, because now they care about their jobs and they care about their future.
I want to shift gears a little bit here. Celine, how are communities in Syria talking about justice right now? Is there a shared understanding of what accountability or forgiveness might look like?
I think this is one of the most difficult conversations being had, whether that's at the levels of, people inside Syria, the people that were displaced, even at the government level. Justice in Syria is something that I don't think that we've seen in modern history, like what we saw happen in the past 15 years. I don't think there's an example that we can look at and be inspired from. When it comes to, there's tens of mass graves being discovered every other day, all over the country. I mean, he made the country like there was an underground reality, whether that's the mass graves or the detention centers. So justice is very, very difficult. And I think that a lot of people are angry when it comes to justice because of the magnitude of how difficult this is going to be. I 100% understand their anger or their emotions when it comes to this, especially the families of the disappeared or the families of the martyrs and the families of people that have passed away. But also, again, if we want to do it right, it is going to take time, and it is going to, I think that we definitely need the international support when it comes to this. And I heard a couple of days ago that a DNA test costs $2,000. I mean, this is for one DNA test. And then sometimes, we have over 200,000, over 150,000 disappeared. And then you do that with the bones, and then every bone, and then, so it's an extremely long road ahead. But I think that for this to be fixed, I think that there needs to be transparency when it comes to the different committees of justice, whether it's transitional justice or, what's it called? in English.
Communal peace.
Communal civil peace. Sorry, guys, I spent too much time in Syria.
Just peace building.
But yeah, peace building is that there has to be transparency from these committees of the government committees to local populations, because there's people that, I know that this guy killed my son and he's living across the street from me. So I'm not going to enjoy that. And I'm going to be very angry about that. And if I don't carry arms and revenge, then that's really good. So patience, transparency, and also understanding that it's a very long road ahead. And I think that not comparing it to other examples of injustice would be good, because what happened is not like anything else in our country under Assad's brutality, I believe.
Mohammed, one of the debates over repealing the Caesar Act was whether or not to place conditions, including relating to some of these issues and the inclusion of minorities and women in the government, and how the Shah government is addressing the sectarian violence that we saw this year. In general, how is the Shah government addressing calls for accountability, and is the response been sufficient in your view?
Addressing accountability or
taking steps towards?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So so what Elizabeth was referring to was a pitch battle here in Washington, D.C., especially in Congress, over whether the repeal of Caesar, the Caesar Act, or Caesar Act sanctions should be unconditional or should have conditions. So there was a proposal that was voted on, was introduced by the House Foreign Affairs Committee at the level of the Chairman French Hill, and it actually was voted on and it passed. And it would have extended Caesar for a couple of more years and had a whole list of conditions. There was another proposal, so that's on the House side. On the Senate side, Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Chris Van Hollen also introduced their own version of the Caesar repeal, and it included a very long list of conditions. And if Syria fails to comply, well, I should say the American Secretary of State has to come out every 4 months and certify to Congress that the Syrian government has fully complied with this very long list of conditions. And should Marco Rubio be unable to make this certification, then there's a snapback, meaning Caesar Act sanctions would automatically be reimposed. Now, if you think about it, would you go to Syria and invest in such a draconian climate?
And actually, me and Mr. Ghanem went and met with
Chris Van Hollen.
Yes, Chris, and before that, Abe Hamadi, after he came back in January. And, they were talking about a gradual removal of sanctions over 2 years. And I raised my hand. I said, I cannot find a single bank that's willing to loan me $1 to go into Syria if there are any sanctions left on Syria, because no one is willing to invest, just like today. No steps have been taken today to invest in Syria, and we all be waiting for the Caesar Act to be removed, hopefully today, inshallah. But I just want to alarm everybody that just because the Caesar Act is removed, that doesn't mean tomorrow let's go, things gonna flip and life is gonna be great and wonderful. No, it's gonna take time because banking sectors still have to get re-energized. They have to get connections. They have a lot of things, and we still have the SST status, state-sponsored terrorism, which we're hoping, hopefully by the first quarter next year, that would be eliminated.
Hopefully so.
But it's not an obstacle today after the Caesar Act being removed. But we have a lot of work ahead of us. And
so that actually was the meeting with Jim Risch, who was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. We were at that meeting together, and he was like, initially, he was I'm in a wait and see mode, and we were all up in revolt, and fortunately, he eventually changed his mind. So back to your question, we really believed that lifting sanctions, lifting Caesar or repealing Caesar with a whole list of conditions and automatic snapback was really not in the United States' interest, because for us, the issue of the economy was not simply about generating output. It was not about making products or getting manufacturing going. This was not, this was, of course, essential, but it was not the point. The point was to help put Syrians back to work and provide them with jobs so that we can do the peace building that we want. I ran into people in Syria who told me that unless, I haven't received a salary for a few months now. If I don't receive a salary for a couple of more months, I'm going to take up arms and I'm going to fight the government. So it was essential to stabilizing things. So that's why we went to war, and eventually we triumphed, and the snapback, we got rid of the snapback. There's no snapback. It's going to be unconditional. The conditions, the word condition now is nowhere to be found in the repeal language. Instead of condition, they replace it with the term certification. So the State Department still has to certify every 6 months that the Syrian government is making progress. So there are sort of like, helpful indicators provided by Congress to the Syrian government about areas they would like to see improvement on, but Caesar would still be repealed by the end of the year. Now, accountability. I tend to be a little bit more frustrated here, and I make no secret of my frustration. I actually shared it with the Syrian president. So I'm a human rights activist. I'm a civil society activist, and the past 15 years, Syria has seen horrendous atrocities. Now, but I also sympathize with the Syrian president, because when he came into office, he faced the dilemma of everyone saying, you have to including me, you have to prioritize transitional justice. And I actually, really annoyed him with that a couple of times. On the other hand, he saw, and perhaps wisely, that his first priority should be stabilizing the situation. So he had to work, he had to turn a blind eye, or he had to go a little bit slow on the transitional justice process in order to stabilize the situation. And he shared his ratiocination with us. He shared his reasoning with us. He said, I perfectly understand this is legitimate, and he also concurs that it is essential for stabilizing the country. But at the same time, he also said, put yourself in my shoes. I'm trying to stabilize the country. If we're, if we do it French style, a French Revolution style with a guillotine, it's we're going to end up in disaster. So we will keep advocating the government to make more progress on transitional justice, but we also understand where they're coming from.
Sorry to interrupt, but you keep referencing lifting Caesar. Could you clarify that for us?
So the Caesar Act was enacted in 2019, imposing secondary sanctions on Syria. It's different from other American sanctions because it involves secondary sanctions, meaning it won't only go after you if you invest in Syria or work with the government in Syria. It would go not only after you as an American citizen, it would go after any citizen of any nationality. Right, so it really closed the Syrian economy to the world. So we got a waiver from the State Department a waiver from Caesar for 6 months. The executive branch of government is only able to waive Caesar on a rolling basis for 6 months. Now, to repeal Caesar completely, we had to go to Congress. We had to go to Congress in May and work with our allies in Congress, Republicans and Democrats, and people like Joe Wilson, Senator Shaheen on the Democratic side, has also been incredibly helpful to introduce a provision to repeal Caesar. And of course, it's been a fight ever since, but finally we secured this amendment to the NDA. We secured it as an amendment to the NDA, and today the House, later today, is going to vote on the NDA, which includes the Caesar repeal.
Thank you.
Soon we're going to go to audience questions, so be thinking of those. And before we do, I want to hear from each of you. What is one thing that makes you most optimistic about where Syria is headed in the next year? Jay, we'll start with you.
It's people, incredible people, hardworking, logical, experienced. I just cannot believe. Every time I meet someone, I'm more and more impressed with the Syrians that have lived for the past 54 years under this tyrant Assad regime. For the past 14 years, bombs coming on their homes and on their families, and they're being killed. And you see them coming out to demonstrate and celebrate in the past months. These people are not stoppable. And you can invest in these people, frankly, at these wages right now. Every US investor, every international investor should take advantage and move a factory or a couple of factories or businesses in there. I've done it. I'm doing, I do R&D. I've just hired an AI company inside Syria to write artificial intelligence software for me inside Syria. And frankly, it cost me 10% of what I have to pay a US company here. And I did it out of I wanted to try the Syrians. It's been an amazing experience. They turned it around so fast. They worked 18 hours a day. They want to prove that, we're here to stay. Web development, we did the same thing. Logo development, other things. We're exploring every opportunity to get these amazing Syrians, this new generation. I'm sure you've seen them. They're unbelievable people.
I think I'm going to say something similar, but the pictures and videos that came out on the anniversary on the 8th, I don't think that we've seen this sort of celebration on this kind of thing. People came out in the millions. And I think that for the first time ever in our history, Syrians for once finally can have like a nationalistic feeling, because you can ask a lot of Syrians. We did not feel like we belonged to Syria because it was Assad's Syria. It wasn't ours. It wasn't for the people. It wasn't for the institutions. It wasn't for the children, et cetera, et cetera. So now, finally, we can be able to belong to this country that we belong to, that we are from. So being able to have this nationalism and start to work on what brings us together as Syrians, and put away all of the other things, whatever we are, whether that's our religion or ethnicity or where we come from. I mean, I'm Circassian Syrian. My ancestors came from the Caucasus when Russia genocided us and we came to Syria. But now I'm Syrian because I belong to this place. So I think that the millions of people, putting all of these things to the side and coming to celebrate this victory of a people against a tyrant, I think.
So to maybe piggyback off of that, I would say it's the fact that Syrians now have a sense of ownership, and that the rebuilding and revitalization of Syria has transformed into a national project. Mm-hmm. Every single member of of Syrian American diaspora I know is super excited, super elated, and they want to contribute in some way or fashion. Same goes for Syrians in the UK, Syrians in Canada, Syrians in the Gulf, and Syrians inside Syria. For the first time in a very long time, they feel that now they have taken ownership of the country back, that it is their country, and that it is not the job of the government alone to do this, but it's incumbent on all of us. This collective this nationwide sense of ownership, I think is what gives me hope. The other thing that gives me hope is that Syrians tragically endured a lot to get to this point. And so we have tremendous civil society now. We have, a new generation of journalists and people who work in media. We have people with experience. We have people who have been educated at Harvard and Columbia and Princeton, and I don't think they will allow any government to take him back into the yoke of tyranny. So some people, raise legitimate concerns with us that, Syria is going to end up despotic like it used to be, and I say no. And that is because the people, I don't believe that the people will accept such a status. Again, and like as Syrian said, we saw this outpouring of euphoria a couple of days ago on the anniversary. Syria had not witnessed anything like this since it gained independence from the French. So when it gained independence from the French, people were out in force like they did a couple of days ago. And then pretty much nothing, because 1963, Ba'ath Party takeover, dictatorship, 6 decades of the rule by one family, really nightmare. And now everyone feels as if this nightmare has lifted. Okay, and the country's heart, so to speak, is beating with life again. This is what gives me tremendous inspiration and hope.
And of course, the Syrian food. I mean, it's just amazing. And if you go to Syria once, you want to go back and again, just to enjoy the food, the scenery, the churches. Miss Britton went there a couple of times this year. She came back with so much love. She's ready to go again. My daughter Diana went down there. She want to buy a house there. I mean, everybody wants, to go back to this beautiful, amazing country and people.
I second that on the food. We'll go to audience questions now. I believe a mic will be passed around. Please introduce yourself and keep your questions as brief as possible so we can fit in many of them. First, I'm going to we have a couple Zoom questions that were printed out. So any of you who would like to answer this, the question is, we understand the positive role of Turkey in lifting sanctions, but would either of the panelists care to comment about Turkey's role in the rest of the challenges ahead, especially regarding the Kurdish groups in the country and beyond?
Do you want to do that?
I can address maybe the economical part. I think Turkey is nervous right now with the reduction of tariffs to 10%, because they see that many of the factories and products are going to be producing competing products, which was, transferred to Turkey. So I think they have an issue with that, and that's going to be positive for Syria, but maybe negative for Turkey. Turkey is very happy and proud and excited for the reduction of refugees. They had 5 million refugees already. At least 500,000 came back, and more to come. So I think that's a win. So it's they lose in one hand, they win on the other.
So I would say, just to provide some context, this is the relationship between Turkey and Syria is, as you know, is not new. The relationship goes back centuries, if not millennia, right? And so, I mean, between the two regions, and between people who inhabited the Levant and people who inhabited that region. And so Turkey has huge stakes. Syria shares a very long border with Turkey. And from a Turkish perspective, they made it very clear that in a fashion that's sort of like similar to the United States expressing concern about their southern border, the Turks are also extremely concerned about their southern border, and they framed it as an existential issue, national security issue. They will not tolerate separatism, and so forth. Now, the good thing is that there is a partner now in Damascus. We found a partner in the government of Damascus. They found a partner in the government of Damascus. Ambassador Tom Barak found a partner in the government of Damascus. So there is this locus of diplomacy in Damascus, this critical node in Damascus. A deal was reached between SDF and Damascus, and Turkey was supportive. We met with the Turkish Usually when the Turkish foreign minister visits Washington, D.C., he meets with the Syrian American community. So we met with him, and he did not describe the agreement in any pejorative terms. He actually was supportive, which was encouraging for us to hear. So we hope that this agreement will be implemented. No, as Ambassador Ford said, we have not seen a lot of progress towards the implementation of this agreement, but we think it should be the way forward. If it's implemented, we believe Turkey could play a very positive role. However, if it were not implemented, and I'm not issuing, please don't get any, I have to make it clear, this is not me issuing threats, but I'm just sharing a concern with you. Well, of course, we're concerned that should this agreement not be implemented, that yes, there is the potential for escalation, and we hope that never happens.
Okay, we'll go to our in-person audience. I believe we have a question out here.
Thank you very much. My name is John Leisenring, and I'm with J&J Real News. We are an unfiltered and hopefully unbiased platform. It's in short supply media and news that's not necessarily biased. But I wanted to echo, before I ask my question, what you had said, Mohammed, to thank Stuart Jones and all the staff here at MEI. I think you folks put on amazing events. I've attended 3 of them, and they're just great. And your hospitality here is second to none. So I think that's important for us to show gratitude. The question is from what Celine and Jay had mentioned. Celine, you had mentioned extreme enthusiasm for what's going on inside, and Jay, you had just mentioned that businessmen need more olive trees and more people getting back to work. And I hear from the panel here today that there's a problem, I believe, with employment and with certain obvious basic needs, water, telephones. The question and the big elephant in the room that probably hasn't been answered in the media is, what about the crime in Syria, and how do you rein in the crime with potential in accountability for criminal acts that are perpetrated? And obviously, I asked that question with Syria's best intent going forward.
I mean, when it comes to crime, of course, that needs to be worked on from all realms and all aspects, but we are in a post-conflict transition. We are in a post-conflict transition of the world, what I believe the world's worst dictatorship that we've seen in modern history. So people, have been extremely polarized. People have been extremely, when you don't have a job, you carry arms. When you don't have a job, you go steal. When you don't have a job, you hurt someone to get something out of it. So this is the reality that we're facing. And this is only going to be fixed when their economy wheel moves forward and when we're able to get people money instead of them having to carry arms. But again, I believe, and this is as someone that's been living in Damascus for the past 6 months, I believe that there's like this magnifying glass that's being put on us, because the general outcome is that I think it's fine for there to be crime today because of the circumstance, because of the context, because of the divide and conquer, because of the past 50 years. That's my personal belief.
I live in Baltimore City. Do you want me to continue?
I already know. I've been here
All right.
43 years.
All right. Well, thank you. I think, when you have your teenager kids walking a couple of miles to go shopping and coming back home, whether they're daughters or boys, they go safely, they come back. Yes, there are situations still, just like in Baltimore, just like in Washington, D.C., just like in Chicago. But Syria is extremely peaceful country. If you walk in the street, if your kids are walking in the street and someone comes and tries to touch them, attack them, do whatever, the entire neighborhood will come out and beat that person up to ensure that your kid is safe. So this is a culture that has been protecting each other from crimes, and it will continue. And this is why I was talking about wages. This is the main problem right now, unemployment and wages. If we can bring that wages, from $75 a month. Can you imagine working for $75 a month, or $100 or $200 or $300 a month, and you make it 1,000 or 2,000? Do you think you're gonna have crime with that kind of culture? And no, I'm not living in Baltimore. I'm staying in Baltimore.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
We have a question over there.
Hi, my name is Adam Kusi. I'm with the University of Virginia. First of all, just thank you to the panel. That's been a great conversation. Common theme throughout has been critical infrastructure. And Jay, you spoke to the need for more grants and things that the Development Finance Corporation, U.S. Trade and Development Agency were created for. And China, with companies like FIDI, have taken over free zones in Hasia. In the latest meeting in Moscow, Russia said that they would be willing to invest in the energy sector and rebuild it. Things that I would say are pretty key to U.S. national security interests. So where does the conversation going forward into building a formal framework for agencies like the DFC, USTDA, to really have that argument to U.S. officials to make this argument that, hey, we need to really make a concerted effort to invest in critical infrastructure that would enhance supply, jobs, employment, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, right?
Yes, sir.
So I suggest before you leave, we'll give you the policy paper that we submitted to the U.S. government from the U.S. Syria Business Council, basically asking for a preferential treatment of U.S. companies in return to the tariff reduction. So we can go in and eliminate these Chinese and Russian companies from taking over Syria like they did before. Having the technology, the secure technology, is now becoming a requirement. Actually, it's being forced by the FCC on the telecom ministry in Syria, okay? And I was told that a phone call was taking place from the FCC asking the ministry to ensure that the communication when the U.S. embassy is open is not relying on Chinese or Russian infrastructure or even Iranians. If you don't know, I'll let you know that the Iranians were actually the ones that were spying on the Syrian mobile network, okay? So all the traffic was passed to the Iranians and other loonies. So that stopped, early this year. And I think the Syrians are well educated right now, and they understand that they cannot jeopardize their relationship with the U.S. and the European Union by bringing in technology from China and Russia. I've been going after China technology for the past 10 plus years, lobbying Senate and Congress to eliminate Huawei and ZTE, and I'm a proud supporter of American technology.
A crusader for American technology.
Celine, one of our online questions returns us to the theme of transitional justice. What are Syrians saying about what should be done with Assad and how he could be brought to justice?
I mean, obviously calling for the prosecution of like a domestic Syrian prosecution of him. But I do think that people understand that that is far beyond our imagination, and I don't think that Moscow would ever do that and Putin would ever do that. But again, if we go and catch the main big guys that we know who they are, we know what they did, and I think that as we've said before, Syrian civil society and archiving and documentation organizations have hundreds of thousands of documents, and then when the fall happened, same thing happened where the government came and picked up all these documents. So we have the ability. I just think that, again, patience is gonna be the key here, and we have to wait until there's a jurisdiction, until there's a way to prosecute these people. A lot of them have run away also, but I think that if we can I don't understand legally, but if we reach out to these governments, for example, that the UAE has a bunch of them, and then Lebanon as well, they all ran away. So if we can come up with a system to also bring these big key guys back and prosecute them. Wasim al-Assad yesterday, there was a big video that came out about what they're doing with him and all of that. But yeah, again, if we need to see key movements of that moving forward with time.
Well, hopefully after the release of the video when Bashar Assad was talking about Putin putting Botox in his face, maybe Putin will have a second thought about shipping Bashar back.
I wish.
Do we have any questions? We've got one right there. Get a microphone.
My name is Dinah Salkini. Thank you guys all for this. It's been great. My question, I know we talk a lot about big investors coming into Syria and big businesses, but my question's more towards making an impact on the individual level. I know Celine talked about people looking for online jobs in Syria, and Jay talked about hiring an AI company. And it had me thinking when I went to Syria this summer, my Arabic wasn't as good as I thought it was. So I wanted to hire an Arabic tutor. And now it had me thinking, you know, why would I not hire someone from Syria rather than searching here? So I guess my question is, you know, are there logistical, you know, things in place right now for that? And kind of how do we motivate others? Like, you know, Jay said he hired an AI company, gave them a shot. How do we motivate others to look towards the same thing?
So a couple of my friends, I don't know if you guys heard of Startup Syria, but and this was also sponsored by the Ministry of Telecommunications. But basically, it's just putting the light on a bunch of these startups that have, you know, reached and been able to serve the customer or serve the basic civilian. So we have this app called Yalla Go, and it's basically an Uber for Syria, and it's very successful, and it does the whole, you know, thing, even with all the sanctions that are on, you know, you can't have an app in Syria with the IP as Syria, but they were able to do the thing and be able to do it correctly. So they won the award for Startup Syria. The awards happened, I think, 2 weeks ago. I was there. We voted for which one was the best. And then there's, so yeah, I think, as you said, localization is very important. And I do believe that that is something that we need to all work across all boards, whether it's humanitarian assistance or is that. And now we're seeing different countries, you know, say that they're going to give millions and billions to Syria, but like, don't give it to the UN, give it to the folks on the ground that are going to be close to the people, that are going to be serving these small businesses and women at home that have no income other than their small little tiny thing. So yeah, localization, but there is a couple things happening. So Startup Syria is one of them. A bunch of our, you know, our youth coming back and wanting to work on that. Sync as well.
Sync as well. Thank you for your question, Diana. So basically, there are so many Syrian organizations right now in the U.S. and around the world. And now with the Caesar Act being lifted this week, hopefully they're gonna put their energy in the right direction to start helping in opportunities like this, whether raising funding, whether creating job opportunities. The tourism sector has not been touched. And, you know, I've been talking to people and they're ready to, I have hundreds of people, they just want to go down. They're saying, organized trips, we want to go to Syria. So I'm hoping this organization will put that in place. And no, you do not need electricity 24 hours in Syria to go and visit Syria and enjoy Syria. I just took a vacation in Saudi Arabia and stayed at a resort called Al Ula. And they don't have any electricity, zero electricity. They lit the entire hotel with 1,500 candles every day. So yes, we can do it again in Syria. So, you know, there's an opportunity for you guys.
Tourism.
Candlestick makers.
One of our online questioners asks, and I think, Jay, I'll direct this one to you. Do you believe that international corporations will continue to and start to invest in Syria as long as there are still extremist foreign fighters that are part of the military, and as long as there are still ethnic and religious conflicts happening in the country? And maybe, Mohammed, you could also speak to, I mean, this was a big concern for Washington, the presence of foreign fighters in the military.
So investors usually, you know, study their risk. They do their due diligence, and you know, they take risk. Sometimes, you know, you make money. Sometimes you lose money. Whether it's in a good country country with sanctions, country with wars. I mean, I went in Afghanistan in 2012. I built the mobile network there, and you know, it was successful. I made tens of millions of dollars out of it. Then I went to Iraq, and I was ripped off for $30+ million. So, you know, you take risks, you make money here, you lose money here. But in Syria, if I was to put my money on it right now, I'll put 90% of my money into Syria today.
So speaking strictly in business terms, there's an early mover premium, you know, high risk, high reward. So should a company, yes, companies should definitely consider, because now there's like a prime opportunity, and that may not come along again in the future, because there could be saturation, contracts all, you know, running out, et cetera, et cetera. So from a strictly business perspective, you should, there's actually, I know of a lot of companies who already reached out to Damascus, so it's not a hypothetical question. The concern I would have for other companies who have not thought about that is that by the time their compliance departments, you know, make that decision, there will be nothing left for them, right? Or maybe just breadcrumbs. However, we're interested in ethnic tensions and communal sectarian tensions being dialed down, because we're interested in genuine peace building and community peace building in Syria, not for any business or economic reason. The issue of foreign fighters is still, it was a concern for the U.S. government, it still is a concern for the U.S. government, and is a concern for Congress. And so that's why the Caesar repeal language, or the provision, includes language, so it has a reporting mechanism now, no snapback, no conditions, but a reporting mechanism. And the State Department still has to certify every 6 months that the Syrian government is making progress on a list of issues, including the issue of foreign fighters. I think the government fully understands that. Keep in mind, some of these foreign fighters they're people who fought along their side for a long time. So it's not like they can, like, you know, ditch them overnight. But they understand that, and I think they have made some progress. There's huge room for improvement, more progress to be made, but they fully understand that, and they understand that is a condition for more buy-in from the international community. Hopefully that will, we're hopeful that that will happen.
Charles, there has been a major reduction in foreign fighters, right? They were 20,000+. They're down to what, 5,000 now?
In the whole country?
Yes.
Yeah, unquestionably.
That's what I saw in your report this morning.
Yes, it's reduced. I mean, in part because of developments in the northeast, but also with regards to the northwest. Some have been folded into the military, others are not.
Right.
I'm not on the panel right now to tackle it, but the ones who are not are an ongoing dilemma for a lot of different actors.
I believe we have, let's see, we'll do right here, and then right there, and there.
Hi, my name is Kristen, and I'm with Dan Church Aid. We're a Danish civil society organization working in Syria on humanitarian response, humanitarian demining, and much of which is led by, at least the response part, by local communities. So we really focus on, you know, locally led development in a truly meaningful way, we think. And I wanted to come back to the comment that you made earlier about UN, you know, the concern about the UN really doubling down amidst the cuts that we've seen across the sector. Is there any advocacy that the Syrian diaspora community or others are doing to kind of mitigate against that? Because I do see that that's a real concern, that the UN will say, you know, let's set up another pool fund and all of this will go through the UN and very little to local communities.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, I think if you guys followed closely in the past couple of years before the regime fell, I think that the UN was complicit with Assad's crimes. I mean, when the earthquake happened, we were there before the UN allowed anything inside. So I do believe that we do need to campaign for this, especially with kind of countries, okay, pledging that, like, okay, we're going to do this amount. Some countries don't know, or some institutions don't know how complicit the UN might have been, or the 60% that they take for their overhead, or et cetera, et cetera. So I do believe that this is something that as a civil society, we do need to work on and point it out. There was also different reports of different organizations that also were very complicit with the regime, especially you guys saw the BBC report of the missing children, of the detainees, and how they were literally lost in the system because of an organization, a European organization that was working in Damascus, SOS, I think, SOS Children it was called. So I believe that this is very important, and I will lobby that with the rest of my civil society colleagues. But yeah, I mean, anyone or anything that's being poured in should be localized, as you guys are doing. So thank you so much for that. The more local, the better. And there's a lot of experience and work that Syrians learned how to do by themselves from the ground up. So the experience is there. You just need to make the connection, and they are able to deliver whatever it is that you need, whether it's social, whether it's arts, whether it's humanitarian, development, whatever it is. So thank you so much for that.
And I would just add to that, because this is an issue I've worked on very closely, sadly and tragically, for over a decade now. There is no faith in the United Nations or in UN agencies in Syria because of the legacy of the UN during the past 13, 14 years. No faith in UN mediation efforts, and the way they go about expenditure, the fact that they allowed the Assad regime to levy, like, I don't know, 40 cents out of a dollar or more, sometimes more. Worked with Asma al-Assad, who was the former first lady, and with her organization. Now, as an expert in international relations, I understand that the UN system was built on the prerogative of the nation state. So the UN will always have this proclivity to work with the state. But so that's something we understand, but there's a difference between that and really, in certain cases, even underreporting. There was a huge scandal in the past with the local UN office in Syria, helping the government underreport the numbers of people who were starved to death in Madaya, just outside Damascus, and then that came to light. So a lot now. I'm not trying to bash, the UN. What I'm trying to say is that the UN has a lot of work to do in order to repair that damage and rebuild that trust. We would love for the UN to to live up to its founding ideals, but that hasn't happened yet, and they have work to do.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question over there.
Question for Jay. How would you assess Damascus's domestic economic policies so far? Do you think they're harming or helping the majority of Syrians?
I mean, frankly, there has been a major shift in the past 6 months. There has been a lot of improvement. When we went in early this year, it took us about 6 months to establish a company in Syria. The process was very complicated. You needed approvals from several ministries. I'm used to going on Maryland Express. Within 15 minutes, I get, I incorporate a company, I get the tax ID, I go on the IRS, I download my TIN, I'm done within the hour. In Syria, it took 6 months and about $5,000 to $8,000 for a lawyer to go and get me what I can get here in 1 hour for a couple of $100. So we've seen a shift. We're also seeing that they are starting to establish trade zones, free trade zones. So I think they're moving in the right direction, but it's not easy, or it's not simple to do all that while you're trying to stabilize a country that has been in war for 54 years, or at least for the past 14 years in a civil war. So I think the focus has been, and as you've seen, all these, ministers and the president, they've been in an airplane trying to deal with international politics right now. I think as the year ended right now, from what we're seeing, they're canceling trips. They're trying to shift focus on rebuilding the domestic situation in Syria. And the Minister of Economy will be coming back. He was with us a couple of months ago. He came with the U.S. Business Council. We took him around, and he assured us that there has been so many steps put in place to make improvement on the domestic policy in Syria.
I think we will make that our last question. I want to thank everyone here today, both in person and online. And Mohammed, Celine, Jay, thank you for what has been a timely and thoughtful exchange. Please stay seated. Charles Lister is going to come up for some closing remarks. And thanks again to our panelists.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles.
Thank you. I'm not going to hold you for more than a few seconds, really, but just to say thank you so much to everyone who came here in person and to the large number of people who dialed in online to engage with this. Thank you to all the MEI staff who made this event possible, especially while I was away traveling, probably not as responsive as I might normally try to be. Thanks to Jay, by the way, for bringing the most fantastic sweets on the site. So from his restaurant in Baltimore and Mora. So please do try some on your way out. I think maybe I'm biased, but I think we've discussed lots of serious challenges over the past few hours, but there's still an overriding sense of optimism and that things need to and are moving still in the right direction. Maybe slow, and there may be bumps along the road, but certainly developments that took place just over a year ago provided an enormous historic opportunity. And so, it's a delight for me working on Syria to be able to have these kinds of conversations and not the ones we used to have for so many years. And of course, to have, all of you in the room to be part of that conversation. So thank you so much to all of you. Please stay engaged with us. We'll continue to be conducting lots of these kinds of events in the next 12 months to come. So thank you.
Thank you. Good job, guys.
Thank you very much.
It was fun.
That was a lot of fun.
Good job.